I stood in a dim corner of the ballroom, observing a couple swaying on the dance floor, their eyes fixed on each other. As her partner drew her closer, the woman's chest rose and fell, her small frame pressed against his large one. Their movements were graceful, he with the agility of an athlete, she following suit admirably. All eyes were on them, sensing a strong emotional connection, perhaps not love, but certainly more than friendship. Her honey blonde hair cascaded gently as she leaned into him, though her proximity was more a result of his firm grip than her own choice. I might have been envious of their bond if the woman weren't my wife of 11 years, now in the embrace of her boss. Instead, I felt a surge of anger and humiliation. It wasn't the first time we'd attended her company's annual awards banquet, and everyone there knew she was married to me. I noticed people searching for me, anticipating the inevitable confrontation. After 3 dances, they left the dance floor together, joining colleagues at a central table. I watched as she gazed at him with the same fervor she once reserved for me. Though it had been some time since I'd seen that look, the revulsion inside me only grew. All I could think was that the eruption was imminent. The pressure was building, but I just had to hold on a little longer. I grappled with the conflict between my current feelings of fear, hatred, and resentment towards the scene unfolding before me and the love, respect, and trust I once held for my beloved wife. It was a battle I found myself losing despite my efforts to overcome these emotions. Now, I was sinking into despair and self-pity, bowing my head in defeat. Over the past months, I had exerted immense effort to win her back and mend the fractures in our marriage. I meticulously planned date nights, attended to household chores, switched off the TV, and attempted to engage in conversation, only to have her walk away. I left flowers, heartfelt notes, and love-filled cards, only to discover them discarded in the trash. Even sending flowers to her workplace yielded no response. What more could I do but wait? I wondered to myself. Pushing these distressing thoughts aside, I made my way back to the makeshift bar nestled in the corner of the room, standing behind Mary Ann, an acquaintance of my wife's from her previous workplace. "Having a good time?" I asked, striving to appear nonchalant. "I always enjoy these yearly gatherings." "Harold sure does love those free drinks," she responded. I offered a smile and nodded, lifting my empty glass. "Me too. By the way, I haven't spotted Jason's wife around. Any idea where she might be?" I hoped my anxiety didn't betray me. "She always dresses so elegantly and is delightful to converse with." "Oh, didn't Kels mention that today Jason served her with divorce papers?" "I guess she was neglecting her marital responsibilities," Mary Ann blurted out, her words lacking much filter as she reached a certain level of intoxication. I found her lack of restraint rather fitting. "No, I don't think so, especially since it's Friday night and all. We came straight here after I finished work, and there wasn't any time for gossiping. I didn't just stretch the truth, it was a blatant lie. We even took the afternoon off to prepare for tonight." "She had plenty of opportunity to bring it up, but she chose not to," I replied, refilling my Captain and diet and fetching a glass of white wine for Kelsey before making my way over to where she and Jason were standing. They were so engrossed in each other that they didn't notice my approach. "Kels, I brought you a glass of wine," I said, handing her the drink. She jumped slightly at the sound of my voice. "Oh, you startled me," she exclaimed, taking the glass. "Thank you, dear." The rest of us felt increasingly uneasy the longer we lingered. Most people suddenly found the tablecloth quite captivating or discovered something fascinating across the room, avoiding direct eye contact. Others stared, likely pondering my thoughts and how oblivious I appeared. A younger guy, approximately 25 years old, even flashed a grin when he noticed me eyeing the table. We locked gazes for a moment before his smile faded, and he, too, suddenly found the tablecloth fascinating. Approaching 1 o'clock in the morning, many guests had already departed from the hotel hall, heading home. However, it was evident that Kelsey wasn't quite ready to part ways with her dance partner. "We should probably head home, honey. I still need to drop off the babysitter, and we promised we wouldn't keep her past 2 tonight," I mentioned, realizing I was intruding on her time with Jason. "Sure, okay. I think it's time for us to leave. See you on Monday," she said with a smile. Relief washed over all of us as the awkwardness neared its end. "Jason, it was nice seeing you," I added, extending my hand for a shake, which he returned. He had a firm grip, evidently trying to assert his strength. Standing 3 inches taller than my 6 feet, he was outweighed by about 15 pounds, and I noticed a slight paunch on my stomach. Pressing a bit firmer than usual, I met his gaze, sensing deceit and self-righteousness in his eyes. Eventually, he released my hand and bid us goodnight. I waved to the remaining guests as we exited the room and headed to the car. We remained silent during the drive home, although Kelsey wore a radiant smile. Upon arriving home, Kelsey checked on Caitlin, our 9-year-old daughter, while I settled up with Brittany and prepared to take her home. Upon my return, I headed to the bedroom to find Kelsey, already asleep in bed. After checking on Caitlin, I visited the bathroom before retiring to the spare room for the night. I knew any possibility of closeness between us was out of the question tonight, as I struggled to recall the last time we had been carnal. With my eyes closing, the ceiling was the last thing I saw before slipping into a restless sleep. Rising early on Saturday morning, I mentally went through my checklist for the day. Caitlin was already in the living room engrossed in her shows, and I offered a slight wave from the doorway. "Have you had breakfast yet?" I inquired. "Yep," she confirmed, waving a spoon dripping with milk, splattering drops onto the carpet. "All right, settle down. Mom's still sleeping, and I need to get to work in my office," I reminded her. "Got it, Dad," she replied with unnecessary volume, causing me to chuckle. Around 8:30, I dialed my lawyer's cell phone, knowing he often worked from home on Saturday mornings. "Good morning, Bill. It's Matthew Franks," I greeted. "Morning, Matt. I'm guessing this isn't a cheery call," he responded, already anticipating the nature of the conversation. "You got it. It's time to set the plan in motion. I've learned that Jason served his wife yesterday. Any word if Kelsey has consulted with a lawyer yet?" "I don't think so, but I'll double-check. Let's meet at the coffee shop in half an hour. Make sure to sign and date the forms with my assistant for notarization. We'll file the paperwork first thing Monday morning and serve her at lunch." Bill outlined the plan. "Sounds good to me. See you soon," I confirmed before ending the call. Arriving early at the coffee shop, I offered a faint smile to the person behind the counter before collecting my order and settling into a cozy chair by the fireplace. Lost in thought. I never imagined I'd be divorcing the one true love of my life. It's challenging to pinpoint the exact moment when you realize your comfortable life is unraveling. For me, it was triggered by a traffic ticket, one of those automatic camera checks for running a red light. When the notice arrived in the mail, I chuckled, instantly recognizing it as Kelsey's doing. She always flipped on her headlights when in a rush. I opened the envelope, deciding to silently shed tears instead of speaking. It seemed futile to confront this directly. The photo depicted Kelsey with a man's shoulder and arm visible beside her. Though his face wasn't visible, I knew who it was. Nothing seemed particularly suspicious. She could have been at lunch or a meeting. I checked the date, March 5th, and something about it bothered me. Recalling our text messages, I remembered plans to stop by Mary's after work to pick up clothes for Kate. At the time, it didn't strike me as unusual. Despite my suspicions, I dismissed them, attributing it to Mary's usual generosity. Checking the intersection on Google Maps revealed it was on the opposite end of town from Mary's residence. Still, I tried to convince myself it could be innocent. However, as I pieced together events since late November, doubts grew. Kelsey had kept a low profile, and holiday arguments became commonplace. By January, affection dwindled, and our conversations revolved around work or Caitlin. We no longer discussed our dreams, family vacations, or our future together. Since childhood, I've had a trust fund. Initially, my great-grandfather purchased undeveloped land in the Pacific Northwest, selling portions as the local town expanded. Upon his passing, I inherited proceeds from these sales, boosting the fund. Following my grandfather's pass away, it grew once more. Thankfully, my family's self-sufficiency meant I never had to dip into it. The balance stabilized and even grew slightly through accrued interest. Upon my father's demise, with my mother also deceased, I inherited all family property, merging it with my trust. With our accumulated wealth, we were on the verge of settling for life. However, Kelsey and I continued to work and increase our net worth. In anticipation of retirement, I obtained a prenuptial agreement to safeguard the fund. Throughout our marriage, Kelsey and I regularly updated our prenup and wills. One clause that remained unchanged was the standard divorce clause, delineating asset ownership. We also included a provision for Caitlin's education in case of my pass away or divorce, with specific conditions regarding the circumstances. To ensure preparedness, I maintained access to legal and accounting services. Seeking advice, I reached out to my lawyer for a referral to the best local divorce attorney, scheduling a consultation later in the week to explore my options. Given our sturdy prenup, he remained unworried about potential financial concerns. I clarified that while I wasn't ready to take drastic action yet, I sought guidance on the next steps. Well, Matt, one option is to hire a private investigator to delve into the situation and ascertain if there's cause for concern. Unfortunately, all my PIs are currently tied up with other cases. It'll be several weeks before they can prioritize yours. But I'm not keen on waiting. This is already keeping me up at night. Are there any other avenues we could explore? There is one possibility, albeit a somewhat dubious one. He's trying to turn over a new leaf, but he's not exactly the most trustworthy character. We affectionately refer to him as Larry the Rogue, Bill elaborated. He's a former cop who got the boot due to complaints and some shady dealings. He could get started immediately, but I'm hesitant to recommend a long-term partnership with him. Why the nickname? I inquired with a chuckle. I want to ensure everything is above board, so if we uncover anything, we're on solid legal footing. If we need to proceed, that's fine. Is he legit? I understand he has a knack for obtaining evidence such as detailed photos, videos, emails, and phone conversations that, let's say, tread the fine line of what's admissible in court. But I've heard his findings are ultimately conclusive proof of infidelity, one way or another. All right, as long as it's within legal bounds, we can settle with him for now and transition to a more reputable private investigator in a couple of weeks, I mused. Pausing, I added, do you reckon he can kick things off today? I'll give him a call and find out. I'll keep you posted here in the office. Sound good? I handled a stack of paperwork for both the lawyer and the dubious investigator, facilitated his connection with my accountant, and kept the retainer fee separate from my personal account to ensure Kelsey remained unaware of my actions. I didn't want to alarm her, especially if this turmoil in our marriage was just a passing phase. Meanwhile, amidst these proceedings, I endeavored to mend my relationship with my wife. Life had taught me that significant changes and out-of-character actions usually have underlying causes. Uncertain about what drove my wife's behavior and whether we were beyond reconciliation, I resolved to fulfill my husbandly duties. Taking matters into my own hands, I showered her with affection and aimed to become the epitome of a loving and supportive husband. Yet my efforts were met with rejection at every turn, signaling that we may have reached an irreversible breaking point. One Thursday afternoon, I was summoned to my lawyer's office to review the findings unearthed by the rogue investigator. I was presented with hours of footage capturing their liaisons, carnal encounters, and apparent bliss as a couple. Accompanied by photographs, call logs, and personal correspondence, the evidence left me both impressed and repulsed by the rogue's methods, affirming the appropriateness of his moniker. I sat there devastated. The idea of Kelsey having an affair with Jason Stanton was inconceivable to me. I could see the appeal of Jason, tall, handsome, and well-built, with a promising career trajectory. Taking charge of Kelsey's department as his personal assistant about a year ago, he had ample opportunity to integrate into her life. A former college baseball star sidelined by a shoulder injury in his senior year, Jason's achievements were impressive, but I never imagined Kelsey allowing him to wedge between us. The weight of it all was crushing. I struggled to breathe, my chest constricted, my vision blurred, and I felt lightheaded. Pushing my chair back, I leaned forward, trying to steady my breath. Inhaling and exhaling deeply, I fought to regain clarity of mind. The sense of loss and emptiness was indescribable. I had lost my confidant, my partner, my lover, and the mother of my child. In that moment, I saw no way forward. Then it worsened. He played back the recording from the day before, revealing why he had gathered us all together. Really? Do you love me? Her voice was tinged with excitement. Yes, my dear. You're perfect. I love you and want us to be a family. You mean you, me, and Caitlin? Exactly. What about Matt and Shannon? We'll divorce them, you'll have Caitlin, and we'll be happy together. A stunned silence followed as Kelsey processed the bombshell her lover had dropped. You really love me, Kels? Yes, absolutely. I hadn't really considered leaving Matt. Consider it for a moment. He can't offer you what I can. You'll be the belle of every ball, part of the elite. You'll experience places and luxuries he could only dream of. I detected the disdain in his tone, picturing the disdainful expression on his face. Losing Kate would devastate him. We're his world. I'll be a far better father than he could ever be. In a year, she won't even want to visit him. Why do you despise him so much? What has he done to you? Her voice held a touch of concern. Truthfully, I wondered the same. He's not worthy of you, Kels. He lacks ambition, content to remain stagnant. He's just a cog enriching someone else. Did you know he's a plant manager? His facility employs 400 people, boasting the highest production and revenue per square foot. I felt a twinge of pride that Kelsey was aware, though though I would have preferred this discussion in their own dining room rather than a hotel room.
He's weak, a beta without drive or ambition, never even pursued an MBA. He served his purpose, honey. I could easily crush him any day of the week.
Jason, don't assume you're superior to Matt. He's not weak. You don't know his backstory. He associated with rough crowds and is skilled with firearms. He nearly took a dark path but chose education. That's why he delayed college after high school. Now, she seemed to boast, he's stronger and tougher than you realize. Promise me you won't resort to violence. I don't want either of you getting hurt. Matt's for Kate's sake, and you're for mine. But I'm not. I'm in love with him. I wished it were true. But you replaced him as my man. My love. She paused, pondering. How will it work when we divorce them simultaneously? I need to prepare before serving Shannon. Given her mental health issues and our year-long celibacy, it shouldn't be challenging. I'll split everything 50-50. She's unlikely to object. Okay, but you must file for Shannon before I consult a lawyer. She was resolute. It seemed she aimed to ensure her stability and not risk her comfortable life, even for her true love's sake. Come here, woman, I motioned, requesting the recording be turned off. At this juncture, listening was unnecessary. I glanced at Bill, grappling with how to handle this. You strike first, Matt. But what if she changes her mind? They rarely do that, Mr. Franks, he remarked solemnly. I'm afraid they've reached a point where nothing you do or say will sway them, Bill added. I observed the scoundrel closely for the first time. He appeared to be in his 30s, fit, and his suit was impeccably tailored, quite unlike my preconceptions. Respectful and seemingly insightful, I began to view him more as Larry than the scoundrel. It seemed he genuinely cared, despite being paid for his services. Would you still want her after knowing all this? Larry inquired, echoing Bill's sentiments. You're probably right, Larry, I acknowledged, turning to Bill. Give me a day or two to decide, and I'll be in touch. All right, sounds good, Matt. Shall we draft the documents now and finalize details later, or halt the process if needed? Bill proposed. Yes, let's proceed that way, I agreed. Larry handed me his business card as we concluded. Here's my personal number, Mr. Franks, in case you ever need me. Please, Larry, call me Matt, I insisted. Thank you, Matt. If you decide to pursue revenge, I know some people who could assist. After all, they don't call me Larry the Dastard for nothing, he remarked with a grin. Appreciative but uncertain, I responded, Nice meeting you, Larry. I'll reach out if I need assistance. Though I doubt I could go through with it against Kells, it's reassuring to know I have support if I choose that path. With a smile, Larry bid farewell and departed in his car. Throughout the weekend, I grappled with my decision, struggling to focus on anything else. It seemed Kelsey was oblivious to the gravity of the situation, having already decided our family's fate. Doubt, anger, fear, and disappointment consumed me, particularly the loss of my identity and family. Caitlin's future weighed heavily on my mind, aggravated by the thought of this arrogant man raising her. Emotions ran rampant, leaving me in a fog of confusion until Sunday morning, when clarity dawned. Sitting on the back porch with a pounding headache, it dawned on me that this fate was inevitable, regardless of my resistance. I'd already lost my wife and family. Now, it was a matter of how and on whose terms. The saying, lead, follow, or get the hell out of the way, resonated with me. I refused to step aside or follow these schemers. There was only one option left, to lead. On Monday morning, I phoned Bill. Bill, it's Matt Franks calling. Good morning, Matt. Any progress on finding a solution? Yes, I'd like you to complete all the necessary paperwork, including only the legal photos Larry obtained. Split everything evenly. I hesitated. Do you think we should sell the house? Yes, we used a low-interest loan from my trust to purchase it, so essentially we've been paying ourselves all along. We'll divide any proceeds from the sale, but I'll repay the full loan amount and the accumulated interest. Also, please allocate $200,000 from my trust to Kells as a considerate payment for her services. It might soften her stance if she knows she won't be left destitute. I'm seeking primary custody of Kate. I understand it won't be simple, but perhaps Larry can uncover some damning information about Jason that diminishes his suitability as a father figure. I've heard he was quite the fraternity standout in college. Maybe he got carried away with some of his exploits. Please have Larry investigate. I have a contingency plan for Kate. If primary custody isn't granted, draft the most generous shared custody arrangement imaginable for me. I paused to allow Bill to catch up. Additionally, I intend to file a lawsuit against Jason for alienation of love and affection. I want to involve his wife, Shannon, in this ordeal as well, ensuring she's fully informed of the situation within legal bounds. On that note, I'd like you to devise another infidelity divorce plan for her. I'll cover the expenses. While we can serve them both in the exclusion room, it's unlikely to yield significant results. I'll also need Shannon to sign a contract with me. I can start drafting the forms, but without her consent or details, I'm unable to proceed further. Bill clarified. I see what you're aiming for. It's about stirring the pot a bit, and while we're at it, I want to sue Kelsey's employer for permitting her affair with her boss. While there may not be a moral clause in their manual, it's dubious for any company to overlook such misconduct under their supervision, especially given his position as her direct superior. It's doubtful this will go far, but let's rattle the cage and see what unfolds. Understood, Matt. This will incur substantial costs up front and potentially escalate. We're looking at extensive manpower here, and if this escalates further, I want to ensure they don't profit unjustly. As my dad used to say, engaging a lawyer is essentially negotiating the price. Bill chuckled at my sarcastic remark about lawyers, remarking, "Your dad was a wise man indeed. Remember, you're not obligated to provide her any funds from your trust. Your prenuptial agreement is rock solid." I understand, Bill. But after reflecting on it over the weekend, I've decided that if I don't leave her in financial straits, she might be more inclined to meet my terms. And truthfully, she deserves it. She put in hard work and supported me. We were both saving for our future together. I figured it might give her an edge over Jason so she won't have to rely on him as much when she's on her own. She deserves better. But there's no way I'm giving that cheating scoundrel Jason more than he's already taken from me in life. I mean, my wife should have been enough. As I spoke, I felt a surge of anger, thinking about how Jason had seized the life that should have been mine. Despite the circumstances, I always strived to be fair in my relationships and wanted to ensure I treated Kelsey with fairness, even if she didn't reciprocate. My solace is knowing that Caitlin will understand my actions later on, when she sees how our family fell apart. Before I forget, Bill, hold off on any filings for now. I want everything prepared and ready to go, but I prefer to wait for her to make the initial move. This way, I'll have more time with Kate in our family home. I know there will come a point when I have to act, but I want to delay until the very last moment when I can't bear it any longer. Got it. We'll keep everything undated and notarized until you're ready. I work from home on Saturday mornings, so feel free to call me then too. We can't file until Monday morning anyway, but I'll have someone ready to serve them as soon as the doors open. Okay, that's the plan. Goodbye for now. I retrieved Larry's business card from my pocket and dialed the number. Larry, it's Matt Franks. How's it going? I'm good, he replied. Are you ready for some dirty work? Well, kind of, but I need you to hold off until I give the green light. No problem, Matt. What's the game plan? Can we meet up? Yes, give me an hour. Sounds good, I responded. I was already waiting when he pulled into the parking lot. After grabbing some coffee and a snack, he sat across from me. I want to gather all the damning evidence. Photos, videos, recordings, everything. And we need to figure out a way to anonymously send it to Shannon Stanton, perhaps through email. No problem. I know someone who operates on the dark web, Larry said, and that's it. How about posting a video on a XXX site or sending nasty messages to Kelsey's parents or co-workers? Man, he's devious, I thought. No, Kels still has to stay in town. I wouldn't want her to be so humiliated that she leaves town with Kate. And despite everything, I still love her, even if she doesn't love me anymore. I slid an envelope containing $5,000 in cash across the table. This should help you get started, but let me know if you need more. Larry accepted the money and glanced at me. I think $3,000 will suffice. He may be tough, but at least he's straightforward. Consider the rest as an advance. I might require your expertise later. Remember, stay on standby until I contact you. I want to catch them off guard, and I have my reasons for allowing them to make the first move. Oh, and we also need to gather information on his wife's health issues. Her medical background could impact our decisions down the line. Can you handle that? Absolutely, Larry replied. And Bill mentioned you were looking into Jason's college years. I'm hoping to uncover something useful if custody becomes a battle. Larry nodded, jotting down a few notes on his pad. After finishing our coffee and exchanging stories about his past experiences as a cop and people we might have known, we shook hands and parted ways. That was 3 months ago. My thoughts returned to the present as Bill arrived, followed shortly by his assistant and Larry. Ready to proceed? Bill inquired once we were all seated. Yes, it seems that way. Larry, do we have any indication if Kelsey has sought legal counsel? As far as I know, no, I replied. I quickly checked her email after Bill's call and didn't find anything. I'll take a closer look today and should know by Monday morning. Larry grinned and gave me a knowing wink. And what about Jason? Any skeletons in his closet? I asked with a glimmer of hope. Well, he was under investigation during his time in the fraternity. Allegations involving date abduction medications and underage girls at parties, Larry revealed. I've received copies of everything and have already handed them over to Bill, I informed the group. Bill glanced up, confirming, I have them in case we need them for the custody hearing. Retrieving the documents we had been diligently working on for the past few months, he indicated where I needed to sign. After signing, Bill's assistant notarized them, and I turned to address the group. Larry, can you find out who Shannon Stanton has hired as her lawyer and inform Bill? Bill, if he's competent, could you share our legal file with him? What if he's not up to par? Bill inquired. Then we'll figure out a way to connect you with Shannon. But I prefer we handle it properly. Bill, can I collect the documents on Monday afternoon? I plan to hand the paperwork to Kelsey personally first, informing her of the situation, and then you can officially serve her on Tuesday. Bill nodded understandingly and conferred with his assistant about preparing the server for Tuesday. I believe we can begin reaching out to Shannon since she'll likely be updated soon. Bill, you can share the file with Shannon's lawyer on Monday afternoon, provided it doesn't interfere with my discussion with Kelsey on Monday evening. I leaned back in my chair, exhaling deeply. Things should be fully underway by Wednesday. Matt, have you considered where Kelsey will stay on Monday night? Bill inquired suddenly. Would it be an issue for her to stay at the house for a few days? No, unless a restraining order is obtained and she consents, I wouldn't share a bed with her. Legally, it shouldn't be an issue, but it might make you uneasy. I'd worry about how a less scrupulous lawyer might exploit this information, Bill added. All right, I'll give her a week to find alternate accommodations. We're not carnal at the moment, so I don't foresee any issues. Oh, you mean sharing the same bed? But our documents grant me temporary control of the house and custody of Kate, right? Yes, until her attorney files a motion to overturn the arrangement, or until we all reach a consensus. I meant actually sharing the same bed. It might give off an odd vibe, Bill explained. Don't worry, we're not sharing a bed currently. Hey Larry, what did you uncover about Shannon's health? She's been battling depression and bipolar disorder for years. Apparently, the medications have dampened her libido, so Mr. Wonderful went searching elsewhere. I'm not sure we want to know how you obtained this information, I remarked. Larry simply grinned and shook his head while Bill pretended to be shocked. Bill, does this have any relevance to our situation? I inquired. Not at the moment. It might become significant later when we address guardianship and determine living arrangements, Bill clarified. As Bill jotted down notes on his iPad, we conversed for a few more minutes before gradually concluding our strategy session and resuming our respective tasks for the day. I felt somewhat disheartened for the remainder of the weekend, weighed down by the impending responsibilities awaiting me on Monday. Kelsey remained oblivious to any changes, as expected. On Sunday, I arranged for my aunt to pick up Caitlin from school on Monday and care for her overnight, allowing me to discuss important family matters with Kelsey. They resided on a farm outside the city, and Caitlin enjoyed playing with their dogs and tending to the animals. She'll be taking Caitlin to school on Tuesday, and I've decided we'll break the news to Caitlin on Tuesday evening. I informed Caitlin about these arrangements, and while she was excited, she seemed a bit puzzled about why she had to wait until Tuesday. I simply explained that Mom and Dad needed some personal time to discuss everything. She reluctantly accepted it. I slept in the spare room again, and once more Kelsey didn't mention it. She visibly sighed with relief when she saw me heading there before bed. As I lay there Sunday night, running through my checklist and reviewing my plan, I eventually drifted off to sleep. On Monday morning, I contacted my VP of operations and requested a week off. I also reached out to my assistant and senior production manager to provide them with any necessary details while I was away. Around 1 o'clock in the afternoon, I entered Bill's office and unexpectedly found Larry there. I noticed a stack of papers on the desk, and the bustling activity in the office indicated that everyone was occupied. Matt, we filed the paperwork at the courthouse this morning, and here are Kelsey's documents as you requested. We've arranged for the official filing at your home around 9 a.m. on Tuesday. Is that suitable? Bill inquired, handing me the envelopes. Yes, that should work. I'll try to persuade her to take the rest of the week off. I'll let you know if that changes, I responded. Great, that's settled. Bill paused momentarily to gather his thoughts before continuing. Larry found Shannon's lawyer, and he's quite competent. So I forwarded him our files, and he seemed quite eager, He might counter-sue for infidelity and aim for a larger share of their assets than just a 50-50 split. He assured me he won't take any action until tomorrow morning. So, everything seems fine. "Okay, gentlemen, are we forgetting anything?" I inquired. "Just a little update. It appears Kelsey has an appointment with her lawyer next week, based on her calls and emails. And Matt, please don't hesitate to reach out if you need further assistance, all right?" Larry asked cautiously, earning another sharp glance from Bill regarding the ongoing situation. "Great, sounds good," I responded, hoping I wouldn't have to delve any deeper into this mess. I guess it's all in Kelsey and Jason's hands now. Leaving Bill's office, I sent a text to Kelsey. "Kels, will you be home by 5:30 tonight?" "Why? What's going on?" she replied. "Nothing serious. I was a bit preoccupied over the weekend and wanted to catch up tonight. I arranged for Aunt Alex to pick up Kate and keep her overnight. I thought I'd bring dinner home. Any requests?" "How thoughtful. Ready? I'll have dinner ready at 5:30. I felt guilty for setting her up like this, but it had become a common occurrence for me lately. I hoped she would interpret it as me making an extra effort to be affectionate. Kelsey arrived home around 5:15 and changed while I set the table and served the food. I poured us each a glass of wine and sat at the table, waiting for her. She took a long sip from her glass as she joined me. We shared the food and engaged in light conversation, and she seemed completely unaware of what was about to unfold. "What's your schedule like for the rest of the week?" I inquired after we finished eating, both of us freely picking at our favorite dishes. "Do you want to make plans?" she asked, glancing at me sideways. "No, I thought you might want to take a week off after we talk," I stated in a flat tone, trying to keep any emotion out of my voice. "Why should I do that?" "You'll understand, Kels," I said, placing the envelope on the table in front of her. She glanced at it and then back at me, taking another sip of wine. "I'm aware of Jason and your intentions to file for divorce," I stated bluntly. She coughed slightly, surprised, and stared at me with a blank expression. I could see her mind working, trying to comprehend how I found out and what actions she could take to slow me down. "What scam?" she finally grasped, referring to the meeting with the lawyer next week and Jason's filing against Shannon. "I know you're in love with him and plan to take Kate and leave me." I opened the bag and slid some photos toward her. Her eyes widened as she set her glass down and picked up the photos, scanning through them. I noticed her eyes glistening and heard her start to hiccup slightly, a sign of her emotional distress. "I'm so sorry, Matthew. I never wanted any of this to happen. I don't know what else to say," she murmured, her gaze fixed on the table. "I understand, Kels. I've been aware of your intentions for months now. I've had time to come to terms with it to some extent. It's incredibly disappointing and painful for me," I responded solemnly. I took a moment to compose myself, attempting to control my rising anger. "The only thing I need to know is if there's something I did or didn't do that pushed you toward Jason," I pressed. "Oh God, no," she exclaimed, meeting my gaze briefly before looking away. "I think it just happened out of guilt and shame. You didn't do anything. You were a wonderful husband and father. I just fell for him," she confessed, her voice breaking. I felt a mix of disappointment and relief. It seemed there was nothing I could do. If she had simply fallen out of love with me and chosen Jason, he had evidently taken enough time to win her over and push me out, leaving me powerless to stop it. Our marriage had reached its end, and all that remained was paperwork. I presented the terms of the divorce and handed them to her. "Here's the proposed agreement. I've already filed my application, so you won't need to do that. If you agree to my terms, the main points include upholding the prenuptial agreement, meaning my trust is off the table. I'm offering to sell off our joint assets and split them equally, including the house. Since I filed first, I'm requesting full custody of Caitlin and minimal child support. Of course, you'll have a flexible visitation schedule. I'll keep her on my insurance, but you'll need to arrange for your own. You can keep your $401k and any investments from the marriage, as well as the inheritance from your mom. I don't want to take what's rightfully yours. We'll divide the investments we made together. Kate and I will remain in the house until it's sold. Additionally, I'm providing $200,000 from my trust to help you get settled. I suggest you create a prenuptial agreement to safeguard your assets if you proceed with Jason. I want to ensure you're self-sufficient, so I'm not asking for spousal support." I paused to let her process what I'd outlined. "I think I should have custody of Caitlin. She'll need her mother as she grows up," she asserted. "I wholeheartedly agree. But you can be involved through visits and calls. Frankly, I don't trust Jason with our daughter. I know he plans to win her over with gifts and charm. Since he couldn't have his own child, he wants mine. I'm already generous in letting him have you, but he won't have our daughter. I understand you'll want to discuss custody further. Let's let the lawyers handle it and try to keep it civil. I offered custody as a peace offering after seeing Kate's reaction during her discussion with Jason. He wouldn't damage her, but that's for you to decide. Separating her from her mother isn't the solution. For now, she'll stay with me until we find a better arrangement. You can stay in the master bedroom for a few nights or a week while you figure things out. Kelsey, my love for you hasn't wavered. I envisioned us conquering the world together, but your actions are tearing me apart, and I'm at a loss. My world feels like it's crumbling, and I'm striving to handle this with fairness and kindness. I genuinely don't want to inflict the pain on you that I'm feeling. But trust me, if you escalate things or let Jason meddle, I won't hesitate to respond in kind. And dear, I have resources at my disposal that neither of you possess. My demeanor shifted and she could sense the frustration in my voice. I can play hardball if pushed. You've seen this side of me before, so please, let's keep this conflict at a manageable level and allow the lawyers to navigate it. I truly want to maintain civility and respect in our interactions. It's crucial for Caitlin to see us being civil. I envision both of us playing active roles in our daughter's life. I implore you, I don't want our situation to devolve into a prolonged, bitter battle. I'm available until the end of the week, and according to legal protocol, you must be formally served, which is set to happen here at the house at 9 a.m. I didn't want to put you in an awkward spot at work, so you may want to consider taking a few days off as well. I know it'll be tough for both of us to share the same space, but I thought perhaps we could sit down with Caitlin tomorrow night or keep her home on Wednesday to explain the situation. What are your thoughts? Kelsey had lost her appetite and appeared visibly unwell, perhaps realizing the gravity of her actions. She had no one to blame but herself. I was content and oblivious until she disrupted it all. She glanced at me, looking bewildered, and conceded, "Matt, you clearly had a plan and outmaneuvered us. I'm not sure how, but you did. I'll notify work first thing and be home until Wednesday at least. Do you think Aunt Alex can keep Caitlin tomorrow night too? Maybe we'll keep her home from school tomorrow and bring her back Wednesday morning so we can talk." My investigator, Larry, uncovered everything after I sensed something was amiss. "I'll call Aunt Alex right away. It seems like a good idea." Kelsey gave a subtle nod when I mentioned Larry, while she gathered some papers. I bid her goodnight and assumed she needed time alone to process. I watched as she retreated to the master bedroom, locking the door, which didn't bother me, as I had already moved most of my belongings to the spare room. I phoned my aunt, explaining the family situation, and she agreed to keep Caitlin an extra night, dropping her off Wednesday morning. I also informed Caitlin, who was puzzled but accepting. I assured her that my mom and I would explain everything. On Wednesday, as I tidied up and prepared for bed, I heard Kelsey murmuring on the phone behind the closed door, followed by quiet sobs as she mourned our broken marriage. Early the next morning, I heard Kelsey downstairs, getting ready for work. At precisely 9 a.m., she accepted the package, excluding the sensitive materials. Shortly after, she grabbed her belongings and left without specifying her destination, presumably to meet Jason, her lawyer, or someone else sympathetic to her plight. Later in the day, Bill called to update me that both Jason and their company had received our legal claims. Surprisingly, Shannon had also countersued Jason around the same time. Bill stressed the importance of remaining vigilant, as Jason had apparently made threats against me. Although I never anticipated Jason acting recklessly given his gains, I took precautions. I retrieved my .45 ACP from the weapon safe, ensured it was loaded, cocked, and locked, then placed it on the chair while I watched TV. A few hours later, while standing at the sink, I spotted a black BMW pulling into my driveway, with an enraged Jason jumping out and retrieving a baseball bat from the back. Sensing danger, I hurried back to my chair where my cell phone was and dialed emergency. Feeling safer with the door locked, I reported to the operator that my wife's boyfriend was in the driveway with a baseball bat. As I heard a second car pull up outside, accompanied by screams and voices indicating Kelsey's presence, a high-pitched screech pierced the air. I jumped as my front door shattered from the impact, and Jason burst inside, screaming threats at the top of his lungs. With my hand on the pistol grip, I remained calm. Jason swung the bat wildly as Kelsey screamed outside, pleading with him to stop. "I took your wife, and now I will eliminate you and take your daughter too," he yelled furiously. I allowed him to advance another 5 feet before drawing my weapon. His narrowed eyes indicated poor judgment. Although his bat was raised above his head, it seemed unlikely to be effective. At a distance of 25 feet, the weapon shot from the chamber was deafening. I was trained to aim for my targets 3 times, relying on instinct. The second shot followed a split second after the first. Jason slowed down, perhaps due to momentum, and stumbled by the time the third round was fired. Though I noticed movement at the door, I remained focused on my task. The bullet pierced the splintered front door, narrowly missing Kelsey's head. She escaped without injury. Jason fell to his knees before collapsing on his stomach. The area echoed with screams, and the weapon shots seemed louder than expected. Sirens wailed as responding officers approached. Unsure of the situation's severity, they placed Kelsey on her stomach and handcuffed her by the open door, her cries continuing. Shocked by the unfolding events, I finally noticed the weapon aimed at me and the officer commanding, "Stop! Drop the weapon!" Coming to my senses, I complied and followed his orders. The following 2 weeks were a whirlwind of chaos and stress. Jason was declared dead at the scene. Later, I found out through police reports and eyewitnesses that he received both my lawsuit and updated divorce papers from his wife simultaneously. It didn't take him long to figure out that the incriminating photos came from me. Kelsey stood beside him as he opened the envelope from his wife and confirmed that she, too, had a set of those photographs. Shortly after, they were summoned to the vice president's office, where they confessed to their affair, unaware of the consequences. Realizing that my lawsuit against the company would likely fail, the management decided to terminate the managing director for engaging in an inappropriate relationship with a subordinate, which they promptly did. In Jason's eyes, I became the embodiment of evil, and he believed I deserved punishment for thwarting his plans. Grabbing one of his souvenir bats from the office, he set off for my house. Kelsey spotted him through the conference room window on the second floor and guessed his destination. She intercepted him in our driveway, attempting to calm him down before any injury was done to me. Unbeknownst to them, I had been forewarned of their arrival and was prepared. Kelsey ended up with a black eye when Jason struck her while she tried to prevent him from entering. Other than that, she sustained no further injuries, but endured months of nightmares. Amidst police interrogations, legal proceedings, and courtroom appearances, I spoke with her briefly, but we never delved into a deep discussion about the events that transpired in our home. Kelsey was a mere shadow of her former self, having lost her husband, lover, and daughter in less than 24 hours. She never fully recovered. Kelsey remained in touch throughout the divorce proceedings and perhaps for about a month after its conclusion. Surprisingly, she never enlisted a lawyer or contested the divorce, allowing me to easily secure custody of Caitlin. However, to my surprise, she never fulfilled her part of the financial settlement. Bill held onto it for her, but eventually returned it to me a year later. She never returned to our home and instead stayed with family until she vanished. Despite a few supervised visits with Caitlin, they were often awkward or unproductive. Regardless, I ensured Caitlin was available for every scheduled visit, whether Kelsey confirmed attendance or not. She showed up roughly every 4th visit. I learned that Kelsey had developed a dependency on painkillers and other prescribed medications to manage her mental well-being. By the time she disappeared, she was unemployed, isolated, and destitute. Neither Caitlin nor I, nor anyone she knew, had any means of contacting her, and she ceased all communication with us. We were left without a wife and mother. Eventually, we sold the house and purchased another in Caitlin's school district, striving to rebuild our lives. Both Caitlin and I sought counseling to cope with the trauma. While I attended for 6 months, I eventually had to suppress the pain and move forward. I had a daughter to care for and a life to lead. Caitlin underwent counseling for several years, intermittently, largely due to her response to the divorce and Kelsey's disappearance. She grappled with numerous psychological challenges. It took me 3 years to gather my bearings enough to consider dating again. A few months later, I encountered a remarkable woman named Jo, who was compassionate and understanding regarding Caitlin's and my circumstances. Our courtship progressed much slower and longer than either of us desired, but eventually evolved into a physical relationship, leading to marriage roughly 16 months later. Jo and I nurtured Caitlin as our own daughter, but opted not to expand our family further. Over time, our lives stabilized and flourished. Our only hurdles centered around significant milestones in Caitlin's life, such as her high school and college graduations. I enlisted Larry's help multiple times in attempts to locate Kelsey, yet every lead proved fruitless. The prevailing belief was that she likely met an unfortunate demise in solitude and despair. It was a harrowing ordeal, but we persevered as best we could and moved forward. I was grateful for the opportunity to devise a strategy and enlist the right assistance to implement it effectively. Before tragedy struck and changed everything, John Valentino was a driven businessman, known for his sharp mind and strong presence in finance. He built his career manipulating currency markets for high-profile clients, including powerful hedge funds. His success brought him wealth and influence, but also enemies, setting the stage for a betrayal that would upend his life. John believed he had control over both his work and personal life. On the surface, his marriage to Eleanor seemed ideal, yet beneath the appearance of success, a deep betrayal was brewing, ready to devastate him. What happened next was no ordinary robbery. It was a carefully orchestrated conspiracy by those he trusted. One August morning, John's life took a terrifying turn. After a normal start to the day, he entered his building's elevator, where two strangers joined him. Their casual conversation quickly became threatening. Without warning, John was attacked. His final thought before losing consciousness was the grim realization that he had been set up. But it was too late. "Mr. Doe!" a voice called, louder now, as he felt sharp pain in his hand, his index finger being crushed. Good, he thought, but he couldn't breathe and felt weighed down. "You're in the hospital, John," the voice was clearer. "I need to run a few tests, then you can sleep." Hospital. Sleep. "Open your eyes, John." He struggled but managed to glimpse light. "Good, try again." A blinding light stabbed at his senses, then vanished. "Can you squeeze my hands?" He felt pressure and tried to move. "Great, now wiggle your toes." A sharp scrape on his foot made him flinch. "Excellent. You're improving, Mr. Doe. Rest again." Darkness came. When he regained awareness, it felt like he was rising from a heavy weight, struggling to break free. He felt cool air from a fan, his legs moving as if walking in bed. But he wasn't. Was he? A faint beep sounded behind him, followed by brief buzzes on his right, and then a persistent chime. He tried to turn his head, triggering an alarm near his feet. "What's happening?" he thought, confused. "Hey there, mate," a friendly voice said. He heard a chair move, and a hand touched his shoulder. "You're waking up after being in a coma for a long time." Something tugged on his arm, and the beeping stopped. "I'm Brian, one of the nurses taking care of you." He tried to speak, but nothing came out. "You can't talk yet because there's a tracheostomy tube in your neck to help you breathe. You're on a ventilator, but we're hoping to remove it soon." He felt a damp cloth wipe his right eye and cheek. "What's wrong with my face?" he wondered. He couldn't feel the left side. "Try to open your eye, John. I'll dim the lights," Brian said. "Okay, give it a try." John blinked, seeing a blurry light. The cloth wiped his eye again, and things brightened. "We're clearing ointment from your eye after the drops," Brian explained, wiping again. The room slowly came into focus, and a figure stood over him. "Blink a few times, it'll help," Brian said, becoming clearer to John. Long brown hair, a short beard, and a stethoscope over dark blue scrubs. "Welcome back, buddy. It's been a long journey," Brian said with a grin, holding a red flashlight. "I'm going to check your eye, okay?" The light was bright but manageable. "Great. Now for the next part. Squeeze my fingers." John squeezed. "Good. Now wiggle your toes." John wiggled them. "All right," Brian said, tapping a tablet. "We're calling you John because we don't know your real name, but you've responded to it. So, is your name John? Nod or shake your head." John nodded. "Yes. 2 points for the red team," Brian laughed, updating his tablet. "You're in the ICU at St. Joe's. You've been here for over a month. It's Wednesday, September 29th, 2021. John struggled to process the information through his foggy mind. "If you look by the door, you'll see a whiteboard with the date and the names of your doctor and the staff working with you," Brian explained, pointing. "I'm Brian, and Dr. Belkin is the intensivist. Ma is your medical assistant, and RT is your respiratory therapist." Brian walked back to the bed. "It's 2 a.m., and we're in the middle of the night shift." He held up a clear plastic tube. "This is a suction catheter. I'm going to clear the spit from the back of your mouth." John heard a slurping sound but barely felt anything. "Other things you should know," Brian continued. "You have a tracheostomy tube, an NG tube in your stomach, and a catheter in your bladder, so you might feel like you have to pee." John did, in fact, feel that way. "Don't worry, your urine's going into a bag by your bed," Brian reassured him. "We've tied your wrists with soft restraints to keep you from pulling anything out while you're still medicated. Once you're off the ventilator, we can remove them if you promise not to tug at anything." Brian's voice softened. "Are you in pain? Squeeze my hand if you are." John shrugged, unsure. "Okay, we want to keep you comfortable, but not too out of it," Brian explained, pointing at a row of medical instruments. "You're on a lot of pills right now. but we'll reduce them when we can." None of it made sense to John, so he stared at the ceiling and drifted off. His sleep was filled with horrific dreams of pain and fear, images that faded quickly. John woke gasping for air, alarms blaring on his left. His left side remained bandaged, and he coughed, feeling intense pain in his throat and chest. "Easy does it," a gentle female voice said. A blonde woman appeared. "I'm Sarah, your respiratory therapist. We're weaning you off the ventilator. Are you in pain?" John nodded, the sharp pain in his face making itself known. His legs moved slightly, guided by robotic attachments, making him walk in place while lying down. "I'll get your nurse," Sarah said before disappearing. Later, John woke more alert. The ventilator was being replaced by a misting blue hose, and he sat higher in bed. His legs were now free of the robotic devices, and he felt clearer. It was a busy morning with doctors, nurses, and therapists coming and going. He was moved to another part of the hospital for scans. The nurses praised his progress, though John didn't understand all the medical jargon. They helped him sit in a chair and stand briefly. The doctors assured him his brain was intact, despite suffering a traumatic brain injury, TBI. One doctor remarked that his shattered skull had prevented his brain from herniating due to swelling. The highlight for John was when they removed the catheter, allowing him to urinate on his own. Simple pleasures, he thought. A few days later, John woke to find several strangers in dark suits gathered around his bed, giving him an uneasy feeling. "Mr. Doe," said the tallest man, with unruly red hair and a gray goatee. His dark eyes looked serious. "I'm Dr. Everett J. Malcolm," he continued without offering a handshake. John swallowed nervously and nodded. Though he still had a track tube, it had been replaced with a smaller one that would let him speak with the Passy-Muir valve. But he didn't have it on now, so he stayed silent. "I represent a medical research consortium," Dr. Malcolm said in a dismissive tone, "involved in cutting-edge medical and biochemical advancements." He shrugged slightly, frowning. "We've monitored your progress for the past 7 weeks and contributed to it. We want to discuss your rehabilitation and other options you might consider." John's shaky hand reached for his dry erase board. He wrote, "What is this about, Doctor?" Malcolm read the board and replied, "It's best to first go over your current situation and what led to it before discussing options." He motioned to a woman in a white lab coat with short hair and a stern expression. She stepped forward, holding a tablet. "Mr. Doe," she began, "you've been hospitalized for nearly 2 months." She paused John's attempt to write. "We don't know exactly how you were injured. Passers-by found you, thought you were dead after a severe striking." She showed John gruesome admission photos from the ER. He turned his head to see them clearly. "The ambulance took you to the nearest ER for a pass-away declaration," she continued. "But they found you were barely alive. This was on August 14th. John blinked, processing. "You had no ID, and your fingerprints matched no database. No tattoos, scars, or surgeries to identify you. Facial recognition was impossible." John started writing again, but she stopped him. "It doesn't matter who you are, Mr. Doe. As far as anyone's concerned, you're dead." She showed him a pass-away certificate. "You technically died 3 times in the first week." She paused. "You've also accumulated a massive medical bill," she added, flipping the tablet to show over $1 million. "That doesn't even include our life-saving interventions," Dr. Malcolm noted. "You haven't started rehab yet, and you're already deep in debt." John thought, what a bedside manner. Dr. Malcolm continued, "Your situation presents unique opportunities we think you should consider before deciding your next steps." A man of East Asian descent stepped forward and bowed slightly at the foot of John's bed. "Mr. Doe," he began, to be brief, "you have a long road ahead before you can hope to return to a normal life. You're still dealing with a serious head injury, more broken bones than I can list, a significant spinal cord injury causing at least partial paralysis on your left side, and your left eye has been destroyed along with much of the surrounding tissue and bone. Additionally, your reproductive organs have been severely damaged, and it's uncertain if your right testicle is still functional." The news was overwhelming, and John struggled to process it. No one had told him the full extent of his injuries until now. He grimaced, trying to remember something concrete, but all he could recall were vague, nightmarish images. Dr. Malcolm cleared his throat, pulling John's focus back. "In a way, you can thank our early intervention for the fact that you're here today," he said, almost casually. "But let's discuss the 2 paths ahead of you." He removed his gold-rimmed glasses, fogged them with his breath, and wiped them with a silk cloth. "You can continue with the current care plan, which involves transferring you to a rehab facility specializing in helping you regain strength, mobility, and independence. He put his glasses back on. However, with no insurance or substantial payment information, your care will be subpar at best. John felt his anxiety rising again, the urge to flee from the room growing stronger amid the cold stares and businesslike suits. Dr. Malcolm's voice cut through the tension. "There's another option." He stepped back, allowing a younger, nervous-looking man with a tablet to approach John's bed. "Mr. Doe," the young man stammered, "before we proceed, we need you to sign some forms." He handed the tablet to John, whose eyes scanned the small print. "You can read it all, of course," the young man added with a weak laugh, "but we'd all be old and gray by the time you finish." He cleared his throat, realizing his joke had fallen flat. "Your first signature gives us authorization to treat you, access to your records, and the power to act on your behalf in legal and medical matters for the immediate future." John hesitated before pressing the yellow signature button. He scribbled his name with his finger. "Great," the young man said, visibly relieved. He flipped to another screen. "The next signatures are important. First, by agreeing to our treatment, you accept the risks and agree not to hold us responsible for any mishaps or adverse outcomes." He winked at John. "Don't worry, Mr. Doe. You'll be in better hands than at a hospice rehab." He swiped to the final screen. "Lastly, this is our non-disclosure agreement. By signing, you agree not to discuss any aspect of your care from now on." John looked at the screen, then set the tablet down. He picked up his dry erase board and slowly wrote, "What do I get in return?" Dr. Malcolm nodded approvingly. "A fair question, Mr. Doe. While I can't promise you'll return to 100%, I can assure you we'll provide the best possible outcome." He crossed his arms, smiling. "In fact, with our unique technologies, you may even exceed your previous limits. Of course," he added, "there are no guarantees." John glanced at the tablet again, still uncertain. Another man from the group softly cleared his throat, drawing a frown from Dr. Malcolm. "If I may, sir," the man said quietly, turning to John. "Mr. Doe, I should also mention that by volunteering for our experimental program, all of your financial liabilities will be forgiven, regardless of the outcome." John looked back at Dr. Malcolm, who gave a subtle nod. Taking a deep breath, John lifted the tablet and scribbled his signature again before handing it back. "Excellent, Mr. Doe," Dr. Malcolm said with a gleam in his eye. "Your new program will begin shortly. You'll be transferred to our facility by this evening." The group of strangers left the room as quietly and quickly as they had arrived. John lay back, his mind racing with what had just transpired. By the time John arrived at the new facility, everything felt like a blur. A petite doctor named Janice Willoughby, with shoulder-length brown hair and large glasses, introduced herself. "When you first came to our attention," she said clinically, "your chances of survival were less than 5%. Standing about 5 feet 6 inches tall with a rail-thin figure hidden in scrubs beneath an oversized lab coat, her voice was calm and methodical, like she was reading from a textbook. "We've been monitoring your progress and have played a significant role in your recovery," she continued. "Your brain was so swollen from the trauma that if your skull hadn't been opened, you would have died. Fortunately, your brain was able to expand beyond the cranial limits, which allowed you to survive." She pointed to MRI, Connecticut, and PT scans on a nearby monitor. The images meant nothing to John, but Dr. Willoughby went on. "Your injuries were extensive, a Lefort 3 fracture to your facial structure, traumatic damage to your left orbital socket, resulting in permanent optical nerve damage. That eye is irreparable. You also suffered right testicular torsion leading to the loss of the organ. You had multiple lung contusions, broken bones in your legs, arms, ribs, and left collarbone." John flinched internally as she listed the damage. "We've repaired or reconstructed most of your facial bones," she continued, "but the swelling and scarring persist." She produced a small silver bag. "To control the swelling and pressure, we administered mannitol to draw fluid away from your brain. But in your case, its effectiveness was limited due to the extensive damage elsewhere." She held up the bag. "This, along with several other treatments, saved your life." John stared at the bag, his thoughts muddled, his body still throbbing with pain. Dr. Willoughby's voice continued, mentioning the advanced technologies involved in his ongoing recovery. "We've also introduced a synthetic blood plasma replacement," she said, "which contains millions of nanobots that respond to telemetric commands. They help regulate your blood flow, prevent clotting, and repair damaged tissues. These nanobots will remain in your system for life." John barely grasped what she was saying. It felt surreal, like he was part of some strange sci-fi experiment. She paused, her intense gaze fixed on him. Tomorrow will begin the next phase of your treatment. We'll be correcting your spinal vertebrae and addressing the nerve pathways that are causing paralysis on your left side. John cleared his throat, testing his voice for the first time. How long will that take? It's a routine procedure, she replied matter-of-factly. You should be back in your room by noon. We'll have a clearer idea of your left side deficits shortly after. Sounds peachy, doctor, John muttered with a weak smirk. 2 months earlier, on Saturday, August 14th, just after 7 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, John Valentino hurried home. He stepped off the bus and rushed the half-block to his apartment building, a 50-story high-rise. The doorman gave him a nod as he passed by. Screwing with Nikki, he grumbled, irritated at wasting so many hours just to keep up with the Asian markets. He reached the elevator bank and pressed the up button. 2 other men joined him as he waited. A door slid open and they all stepped into the elevator. He pressed the button for the 36th floor, and one of the men pressed the button for the 40th. John frowned, knowing that floor belonged to a hedge fund he'd worked with before. You're Mr. Valentino, right? A thick Jersey accent asked from behind him. Yeah, who's asking? John shrugged, not bothering to turn around. Our buddy Lenny told us about you. Said you're a real shark in the markets. Lenny who? John asked, frowning. As he began to turn, a loud clicking noise erupted, and his head exploded in a blinding flash of pain and white light. Johnny, a voice sang mockingly. Hey, Johnny! He was jolted back to consciousness by the sharp sting of ammonia in his nose. His head pounded and his eyes watered. He moaned and tried to move, but he couldn't. There he is, said the same smooth, mocking voice. John's vision cleared, and he found himself staring up at a middle-aged man with an angular, hawk-like face. The man wore a 3-piece Italian suit, his black hair slicked back, and he reeked of cheap cologne. He grinned down at John while holding the smelling salts at arm's length. What? John's throat was dry. Hey, Johnny, welcome back. Who are you? John asked as he began noticing more details of his predicament. His hands were tied behind his back, his feet bound, and he was lying unclothed on a cold, hard linoleum floor. What's this? He struggled but couldn't move. The man stood up straight, tossing the smelling salts aside. His smile didn't waver. I'm Leonard Rousseau. My friends call me Lenny, he said. And this, he gestured around, is the first day of the rest of your life, however long that may be. John's head throbbed as he tried to process what was happening. Why are you doing this to me? Stand him up, boys, Lenny ordered. The 2 men from the elevator appeared and grabbed John by the arms, pulling him to his feet. He swayed but remained held firmly. He glanced around, trying to recognize his surroundings, but nothing was familiar. His gaze returned to Lenny, filled with fear. You see, Johnny, it's like this. Lenny paced in front of John. You've been working hard, manipulating the currency markets for a colleague of mine. He stopped, grinning in John's face. And you've done a great job. Lenny waved a device that looked like a cattle prod in front of John's face. But I also know you've been siphoning off some of this colleague's capital into a nice, discreet offshore account, supposedly to protect it from prying eyes. A cold sweat broke out across John's body. No one knew about his secret transfers. No one except him and Andrea, his employer. Unless... I don't know... John began to deny it. But Lenny moved swiftly, activating the taser and jabbing it into his chest. A scream ripped from John's throat as 50,000 volts surged through his body, sending every muscle into violent spasms. The pain was unbearable, and John blacked out briefly. Don't take me for a fool, Mr. Valentino, Lenny shouted angrily, grabbing John's face and forcing him to look into his eyes. My patience is running thin. I want the account numbers and access codes to those offshore accounts, and I want them now. This only gets worse for you the longer you hold out. Please, John gasped when he regained his voice. You don't understand. No, wait, he cried as Lenny raised the taser again. Lenny sneered, shaking his head. Johnny, Johnny, Johnny. He wagged a finger in John's face. Ellie was right about you, you know. John's heart sank instantly. Eleanor. They must have gotten to her first, tortured her. His wife, just shy of their first anniversary, had been waiting for him to come home so they could celebrate. They must have grabbed her right after he left the office. He had just spoken to her as he was heading out. Eleanor! He struggled with renewed strength as the 2 thugs held him tightly. What have you done to her? He demanded. I swear! Lenny burst into laughter, as if he'd just heard the best joke. "What have I done?" he howled. "Man, you're a real idiot." More laughter echoed from behind as John, weary, turned his head from side to side. "Hey, Ellie, baby, come here and tell this sap what I've been doing to you," Lenny called out. John turned his head toward the soft sound of high heels clicking as she came into view. "Hello, Johnny," she said smoothly, her voice rich and confident as she moved to stand beside Lenny, pressing herself against him. Shock, confusion, and heartbreak collided in John's head as he stared at her wide-eyed. There was no emotion in her cornflower blue eyes as she gazed at him. Eleanor de Mercurio Valentino, standing 5 feet 8 inches tall, looked as elegant as ever. Her burnished bronze hair, cut to shoulder length, shone in the light, and she wore a stylish seafoam green evening gown with 4-inch white leather stilettos. She looked like she had just stepped off the cover of a fashion magazine. "Ellie, what?" John stammered. "Oh, Johnny," Lenny chuckled. "For someone as smart as you, you're a complete moron." He grinned at the men holding John. "You seriously have no clue, do you?" Laughter echoed around them. "This lady you married?" Lenny wrapped an arm possessively around her waist. "She's my girl." The two kissed passionately in front of him, locking lips and tangling tongues. Disbelief and fury fought within John as his legs nearly gave out under the firm grip of his captors. "How could this be? I bet you didn't know I was screwing her right before she walked down the aisle to you," Lenny laughed again. "I've been with Ellie here since she was sneaking out of her mom's house." John dropped his head in defeat, staring miserably at the floor. He squeezed his eyes shut, trying to stop the tears of frustration from falling. "Aw, baby," Eleanor crooned. "Look, you made him cry," she giggled cruelly. John took ragged breaths, trying to process the ultimate betrayal. How had he missed the signs? When he opened his eyes, she was standing right in front of him, a sneer twisting her once lovely face. This wasn't the Eleanor he had fallen in love with and married. She was a completely different person. This Eleanor was darker, more confident, and completely devoid of love or compassion. "Tell him what he wants to know, Johnny, and it'll go much easier for you," she said coldly, lifting his chin with a manicured fingernail. "You always said you'd do anything for me, right, baby?" She suddenly transformed, her voice soft and sweet like the woman he used to know and trust. "Don't you want me to be happy, sweetheart?" she cooed seductively. Anger surged through John as he glared at her, catching her off guard for just a moment before the cold, cruel version of her returned. She released his chin and reached down, grabbing him roughly by his groin. Her nails dug painfully into his skin as she shook him. John cried out in agony as her nails sank deeper, crushing him. "Give us the account numbers and codes," she shrieked in his face. "Whoa, easy there, sweetheart," Lenny laughed, pulling her away. "We're saving the jewels for last, babe." He turned to her as he began unfastening his trousers. "You want to go after his manhood? Let's show him what you've got." A wicked gleam lit up Eleanor's eyes as she looked back at John with a smirk. She knelt in front of Lenny, humiliating John further. "See this, baby?" she taunted John. "This is what a real man is." John tried to look away, but one of the men holding him grabbed his head and forced him to watch. Nausea washed over him as he was made to witness the degrading act. Lenny took her right there, and tears streamed down John's face as the last remnants of his love for her burned away in a fiery rage. The betrayal was unbearable, but watching her enjoy it made it even worse. When Lenny was finished, he grinned at John. "You like that? Now let's get back to business." Hope slipped away from John. His body was broken, his spirit shattered. The pain barely registered anymore as he tried to retreat into himself. But Lenny wasn't done. He clicked the taser back on. "One more chance, Johnny," he said, his voice icy. "Give me the codes or you won't survive much longer." John, exhausted and devastated, choked out, "Please, just let her go. Don't hurt her." Lenny sneered. "Oh, Johnny, you still don't get it, do you?" He gestured to Eleanor. "She's been in on this the whole time. She's not the sufferer you are." John looked at her, his heart sinking even lower. She stood there, calm, without a trace of the woman he once loved. "Tell him, Ellie," Lenny ordered. Eleanor smiled coldly. "It's true, Johnny. I never loved you. This was always about the money. Just give him what he wants and make it easier on yourself." John's last bit of hope crumbled. He was utterly alone, and everything he thought he knew was a lie. Lenny leaned in close, his voice a dangerous whisper. "What's it going to be, Valentino?" Unable to endure any more, John broke. "Fine," he gasped. "I'll give you the codes." Just stop." Lenny's wolfish grin returned. "Good boy." They dragged John back into the chair, and Eleanor sat at the laptop, ready to input the codes. Through gritted teeth, John began reciting the numbers and passwords, each word draining the last bit of his will. Once the codes were entered, Lenny checked the screen, his face lighting up with satisfaction. "See? That wasn't so hard, was it?" John slumped in the chair, barely conscious, his body racked with pain from the endless torture. His vision blurred and his mind swirled in a fog of betrayal and agony. "Well, Johnny, thanks for cooperating," Lenny mocked. He nodded to his thugs, Sal and Polly. "Finish him." John closed his eyes, welcoming the darkness. He didn't care anymore. Everything he loved was gone. Suddenly, a boot slammed into his ribs, jolting him with fresh pain. This time, it felt different. With a grim satisfaction, John realized he had lived long enough to give them the codes, but something deep inside him refused to die, an ember of rage that wouldn't burn out. In a last desperate act, John lifted his bound hands and struck Lenny in the groin with all his remaining strength. Lenny screamed, stumbling back in pain. "I won't let you win," John muttered, the last ounce of defiance fueling his broken body. Lenny, enraged, clutched himself and roared, "You son of a witch!" John didn't see the boot that slammed into his face, plunging him into darkness for the final time. As John slipped into the abyss, he felt a grim sense of satisfaction hearing Lenny's furious scream. "He bit me! God damn it, he bit me!" A boot came crashing down on his head, and then there was only silence. Returning to the present, it was Friday, October 15th. Monique Thibodeau was a striking woman of mixed heritage, inheriting the best features from her French mother and African-American father. Her angular facial features, high cheekbones, and dusky gray eyes gave her a captivating look. Her hair, bleached to a light copper color, was straightened to fall evenly to her shoulders, with step bangs accentuating her thin eyebrows and piercing gaze. Monique often wore skin-tight leggings and halter tops, but during pool therapy with John, she opted for a revealing one-piece swimsuit. John had met Monique shortly after his spinal surgery, and they had spent countless hours together since. When she wasn't guiding him through ambulation or resistance exercises, she helped him with daily tasks: dressing, cooking, eating, washing, and shaving. As his massage therapist, she also worked with him to regain control of routine functions like typing, texting, and using a remote. John had developed a mix of admiration and frustration toward her. No matter how angry or abusive he got, Monique remained cheerful and positive. Despite his irritation, he couldn't deny her success. As he regained strength and independence, he learned that nanobots played a major role in his rehabilitation, helping his muscles recover faster and grow leaner. One Saturday evening, Monique appeared in his room wearing a terry cloth robe and carrying a tray. She smiled at his weary expression and laughed lightly. "Don't look too happy to see me, John," she teased as she sat on the edge of his queen-sized bed. The robe parted at her knees, revealing a length of her long, mahogany-toned leg. "You can relax. I'm not here in any official capacity." "Well, not quite," she added with a playful grin. John grumbled, "I thought we were done for the day, Mon." He didn't really mind her presence, though. In fact, he found himself more drawn to her each day, though he was sore all over and had been looking forward to a good night's rest. "I spoke to Dr. Willoughby earlier," Monique said, placing the tray on the bed. "She mentioned needing a sample." She smiled mischievously. "A seed sample, to be exact." John's eyes widened in surprise. "What?" Monique gave him a coy smile. "She wanted you to self-express tomorrow morning, but I convinced her we could get it sooner." She lifted a small packet from the tray. John was speechless as she stood and slowly untied her robe, letting it fall open. His eyes followed her every move, taking in her flawless body. She sat back on the bed, leaning in to cradle his scarred face in her soft hands. She kissed him, and John's mind raced. He had admired her beauty for some time, but never imagined this. Her touch was gentle yet intense, stirring something deep within him. For the first time since his injury, John felt desire. Monique took the sample with clinical precision, but there was an undeniable closeness in her actions. When she finished, she stood up with the tray and began walking toward the door. John's eyes stayed on her, captivated by her graceful movements. As she reached the door, it unexpectedly opened. Dr. Willoughby entered, her expression neutral. She took the tray from Monique without a word and left. Monique turned back to John with a smile. She walked back to the bed, her robe still open, and crawled under the covers beside him. John welcomed her embrace, wrapping his arms around her as they kissed again, this time with deeper passion. When they finally pulled apart, Monique gazed lovingly into his eyes. "Now we're free to make all the love we want," she whispered. Her words were music to his ears. John had never thought he could feel warmth or connection again after everything he'd been through. But here she was, bringing him back to life. Their relationship grew deeper, blending physical rehabilitation with emotional support. Monique was always by his side, guiding him through the darkest moments of his recovery. At the same time, John underwent intense psychological counseling to piece together his fragmented memories and cope with the emotional trauma. As more memories of the violence he endured resurfaced, he began having nightmares. No amount of physical therapy or nanobot technology could ease the weight of his mental anguish, but waking up in Monique's arms every morning gave him a small sense of peace. As John's physical recovery progressed, other staff at the Institute began taking notice, eager to test the limits of his body. He underwent a variety of challenges, from strength tests to endurance trials. At one point, they even exposed him to extreme solar radiation in a high-tech tanning booth, watching as his skin absorbed the misuse without reddening, though he did end up with an impressive tan. He wasn't quite an Olympic athlete yet, but his potential was undeniable. However, there was one area that continued to trouble the doctors, his left eye, or rather its absence. Throughout his rehabilitation, he wore an eye patch over a soft orbital prosthetic. He had several delicate surgeries to reconstruct his optic nerves and orbital structure. Finally, the day came when he was ready for his mechanical eye. Sitting in a room full of doctors, John listened as they explained the pros and cons of the device. One doctor handed him a model and described how it would connect to his remaining nerve fibers. "This is all cutting-edge technology and highly experimental," the doctor explained. "So, I'm a guinea pig," John joked, trying to lighten the mood. "In a way, yes," the doctor replied. "But on the bright side, what do you have to lose?" John chuckled. "So with this new eye, I won't be blind anymore, but I won't exactly see either." "We can't say for sure until after the procedure," the doctor responded. "But we expect improved night vision. However, you won't have color vision or depth perception from the prosthetic." John raised his hands in surrender, stopping the technical talk. "Let's just do it and see how it turns out. Where do I sign?" The surgery was done the next day, and John was bandaged as his tissues healed. The nanobots were expected to aid in the process, and everyone anxiously awaited the results. During his recovery, Dr. Malcolm made brief appearances, emotionally distant, but praising John's progress. The Institute had also provided John with access to information about his past life and the financial dealings that had led to his brutal attack. John spent hours on the computer, conducting his own investigation. He tracked the funds from the corrupted accounts, carefully piecing together every digital move his enemies had made. Despite the legal team's advice to let go of the past, John was resolute. He would get revenge on those responsible for his suffering. As John re-entered society, his facial scars made him unrecognizable to anyone from his previous life. People avoided him, and although the doctors offered plastic surgery, he refused. The scars were a reminder of his hatred for his ex-wife Eleanor and her lover Lenny. John wasn't finished with them. Not by a long shot. On Friday, December 17th, 2021, Jimmy Sims, known as Sweet Jimmy, sat at his vanity, putting the finishing touches on his makeup. He hummed Aretha Franklin's Respect as he puckered his lips at the fabulous reflection in the mirror. With a curly wig and glamorous lashes, he twirled before the mirror, reaching for his sequined gown. A knock at the dressing room door interrupted his routine. "Sweet Jimmy ain't ready for visitors," he called out sweetly. The door's lock snapped as it was forced open, and a tall figure stepped in, dressed in blue jeans and a hoodie, the hood pulled low to obscure his face. "I won't take much of your time, Jimmy," a deep voice rumbled. Jimmy paled, a chill running down his spine. "Who?" "Relax, buddy," the figure said. "I'm not here to hurt you." Jimmy cautiously turned back to the mirror, eyeing the man behind him. "Zip me up, sugar?" he asked, trying to regain his usual flair. John snorted and stepped forward to zip up Jimmy's gown. "Sweet Jimmy always has time for his biggest fans," Jimmy purred. "And you're definitely one of my biggest." John stayed silent, but the tension in the room was thick. "I've got something else in mind," John said in a low voice. "A favor." "Oh, Sweet Jimmy loves doing favors," Jimmy purred as he slipped into his platform stilettos and strapped them on. "Come to the club on Friday night, and I'll make sure you get what you need." Sweet Jimmy blew a kiss at the mirror before fixing a smudge in his mascara. But why don't you tell me what you're really after, honey? He glanced at the man's reflection in the mirror. John pulled back his hood, revealing his scarred face. Jimmy's eyes went wide, and he turned to face John, reaching out to touch the lifeless glass eyes staring back at him. "Oh, baby," Jimmy crooned. "Who did this to you?" John allowed the touch for a moment before stepping back. "Let's just say I've got a score to settle with Sal and Polly." Jimmy gasped at the mention of their names. He knew all too well who they were. He shook his head in fear. "Oh no, Sweet Jimmy had his run-ins with those two. No way I'm getting involved again. They like to hurt people." "I know, Jimmy," John said calmly. "All I need you to do is get them outside, promise them anything, and I swear they'll never hurt you or anyone else again." John pulled a roll of cash from his pocket and tossed it onto the vanity. "For your trouble." The parking lot behind the Bearded Clam was dark and unpaved. Cars, trucks, and motorcycles lined the perimeter, with only the faint glow of streetlights from the front and side of the building providing light. The back door opened, letting the heavy bass of the club's music echo into the still night. Jimmy stumbled drunkenly outside, followed by two mob enforcers eager to indulge in Sweet Jimmy's company.
"Oh, Sweet Jimmy is on fire tonight,"
they hollered as he twirled away from them. Pulling out a cigarette pack, he held one up seductively and smiled. "Do either of you boys have a light?" he purred. Sal and Polly followed him into the center of the lot, growing impatient as Jimmy shrugged and lit his own. The flicker of the lighter briefly blinded them as they grumbled about getting their fun and heading back inside. "Well, well, well," an ominous voice interrupted from the shadows. "If it isn't Polly and Sal, how's it going, boys?" Startled, they spun around to see a dark figure emerge from the shadows of the dive.
"Hey!"
Polly barked angrily.
"Who the hell are you sneaking up on us like that?"
He balled his fists, ready to pound the intruder. "Don't you remember me, Polly?" John said, stepping forward. He pulled back his hood, but the dim light didn't reveal much of his battered face, except for the faint glint of his robotic eye. He grinned at the uneasy mobsters. Sal tried to sidestep into a flanking position, but John's reflexes were sharp. He grabbed Sal by the throat and yanked him forward, while simultaneously snatching Polly's neck. The two men's heads collided with a sickening thud, and they crumpled at John's feet. Sweet Jimmy's cigarette fell from his lips as he dropped the pretense of his feminine act. "Holy crap, dude!" he exclaimed. "Who the hell are you?" "Don't worry about it, Jimmy," John said quietly. "Just head back inside and forget this ever happened, okay?" Wide-eyed, Jimmy nodded vigorously and hurried back into the bar. Polly groggily came to consciousness in the early morning. The fresh ocean air and squawking seagulls disoriented him as he tried to make sense of his surroundings. He was seated on a cold wooden beam, his bare feet dangling into the seawater. Sal sat across from him, facing him in the same position. Polly felt the sharp sting of barnacles cutting into his back as he realized he was tied to a piling behind him. His mouth was gagged, and his hands were bound in front of him. Then he looked down between his legs, and his eyes widened in horror. His flesh had been nailed to the wooden beam beneath him, the large spike driven through the most sensitive part of his body. Sal was in the same predicament across from him. As soon as Polly became aware of the pain, it surged through him, intensifying as he tried to move. A lazy wave splashed through the pilings, spraying his face and chest. Across from him, Sal groaned and, upon realizing his own predicament, started screaming through his gag. "Good morning, boys," John greeted them warmly, stepping into view. The water reached his hips as he approached. "I wasn't sure you'd wake up at all. Thought you might drown on me," he said with a chuckle. The two men stared at him in terror, not recognizing the scarred face and mechanical eye looking down at them with amusement. "You don't recognize your own handiwork?" John asked. "Tell me, how's Lenny doing after I tried to bite him off?" He glanced back and forth between them as sudden recognition dawned. Their expressions became even more horrified. "Well, I guess you can't tell me much with those gags on." He laughed and held up an old green wine bottle encrusted with barnacles, clearly plucked from the sea. "Don't you just hate littering? Especially when we can reuse so many things nowadays." He gestured around them at the barnacle-covered pilings towering overhead. "Take this bottle, for instance," he said, swinging it over Sal's head. Sal flinched as the bottle shattered against the piling behind him, raining glass into his lap. "Now, this bottle can be used to cut," John announced, gripping a shard of glass. "Let me show you." Sal whimpered through his gag as John clumsily sawed through the rope tying his chest to the piling, nicking his skin several times in the process. The rope fell away. "Careful now," John warned. "Don't fall off the beam and end up hanging by that nail." Sal's eyes went wide as another wave surged, reaching higher. He clung to the beam in fear. John turned to Polly and started sawing at his rope, muttering, "Dang, the tide's coming in faster than I thought." He cut through Polly's rope, letting it fall loose. Now only a thin twine tied their hands together, leaving them vulnerable as the water rose around them. John stepped back, pointing a broken bottle at their tied-down limbs. "You've got a choice," he said, his voice firm as they stared in terror. "Cut yourselves loose or drown." He nodded toward their wrists. "I've bled a lot lately, and learned some things," he added with a grin, as if sharing a secret. "It's easy to bleed out, so you've got to be careful." A higher wave came in, almost reaching the beam. "That string around your wrists? It makes a perfect tourniquet." He glanced at them. "You know what a tourniquet is, right?" They stared back, horrified. "It's French for turnstile. Don't ask me why." He shrugged. "Anyway, tie it tight below where you're cutting. That way you won't bleed to pass away when you free yourself." His grin turned sinister. "See? No exsanguination." Another wave crashed in, threatening to knock them off. "Exsanguination," he repeated slowly. "Cool word, huh? Not French, it's Latin. Means bloodless." The water rose faster. "In a few minutes, the tide will be over you, so move quick." He eyed the bottle in his hand. "Sorry, I only found one, so you'll have to share." A large wave hit, nearly knocking them into the water, but John steadied them. For a moment, they looked at him with gratitude. "I can leave the bottle here," he mused, "but it might wash away." He paused, calculating. "How about this? I'll give it to the first one who tells me where Lenny and Eleanor are." The men exchanged desperate glances. "Don't take too long," John warned. "Time's ticking." That evening, a sleek black Lincoln Continental glided through the city streets and into a garage, descending to the executive parking area. It stopped by the elevators. The driver opened the door for Lenny, who then helped Eleanor out. Arm in arm, they stepped into the elevator, Lenny pressing the button for his penthouse. Unexpectedly, the elevator stopped on the 5th floor. A large man in a hoodie and sunglasses stepped in. Lenny glared at him. "This is a private elevator," he snapped. "Use the public one." The man silently held up a black access card, slid it into the VIP slot, and pressed a button for a lower floor. The doors closed again. "You've got a lot of nerve, pal," Lenny growled, reaching to grab the guy's shoulder. He didn't expect the man to spin around and press the metal electrodes of a taser to his throat. Eleanor screamed as the device clicked repeatedly, sending Lenny into convulsions before he collapsed to the floor. She stood frozen in horror as the man loomed over her and pulled back his hood. "Hi, sweetheart," John said cheerfully, taking off his sunglasses. "Miss me?" He gave her a few seconds to absorb the horror of his scarred face and artificial eye before zapping her with the taser. Once she crumpled next to Lenny, John turned to the control panel, pulling out a fire access key to reroute the carriage to the emergency vehicle deployment area on the first basement level. Lenny woke to the sting of repeated slaps. "Hey, Lenny, wake up! Time to face the music!" John yelled, leaning over his crumpled body. Lenny shook his head, trying to clear it, realizing he was bound hand and foot, lying on the floor of a small compartment that seemed to be moving. He was also completely unclothed and shivering from the cold. "What the?" he mumbled, looking up. His eyes widened in shock as he recognized the disfigured figure standing over him. "Who?" "Don't you remember me?" John asked cheerfully. "We were real close just a few months ago." A muffled whimper came from behind, and Lenny felt another body pressed against his back. "Ellie, baby!" "Oh, isn't love grand?" John sang as he grabbed Lenny by the face, pulling him up to sit against the bulkhead so he could see John's ex-wife. Eleanor was similarly tied up, curled in a fetal position on the cold deck, sobbing at his feet. "Come on, Ellie," John chided. "Don't be a downer. Tell him." Eleanor looked up at John's mangled face, weeping. "Please, John," she whispered, barely audible through her sobs. "Johnny?" Lenny asked, stunned. "But you're dead. Polly and Sal said they fed you to the sharks." John smiled, shaking his head. "Oh, Lenny, they botched it. I accidentally fell out of the car onto the street so they couldn't just come back and finish the job." He spread his arms mockingly. "So they lied to you. Can't get good help these days." The deck beneath them shifted and rocked slightly. John turned away and walked toward a small ladder, pulling down a duffel bag from above. He rummaged through it and pulled out 2 brick-sized packages wrapped in dark plastic. He stuck one on either side of the bulkhead above their heads, pressing a small button on each, causing red lights to flash. "What the hell are you doing?" Lenny asked, his voice rising in panic. "Well, Lenny, I'm a bit ticked off, John said pleasantly, as if they were chatting casually. After everything you put me through, and you didn't even have the decency to eliminate me. He grinned at the terrified man. Payback's a real pain, huh? He gestured around casually. We're currently drifting off the Outer Banks on this little cruiser that no one will miss. He reached back into the duffel bag, pulling out 2 cinder blocks, setting one beside each of them. Using a length of rope, he tied a block to each of their bound feet. I've placed shaped charges all around the hull, John explained calmly. Once I detonate them, the bottom of the boat will fall out, and you two will go right down with it. He gloated, enjoying their terror. Did you know great hammerhead sharks migrate through here? He smirked. Well, it's been nice knowing you both. Lenny and Eleanor screamed in terror, their desperate pleas echoing in the small cabin. John ignored them, focusing on climbing the ladder to the hatch. He exited, leaving them to their fate. Once on deck, he looked around into the darkness, seeing only empty ocean in every direction, even with his enhanced optical eye. He moved to the side of the boat, climbed over, and dropped nimbly into a gray Zodiac tethered next to the yacht. After casting off, he pulled the cord on the outboard motor. It roared to life, and he cruised slowly away from the doomed vessel. Reaching into his pocket, John pulled out a trigger. Without hesitation, he flipped the switch. The explosion's thud reverberated through his inflatable, vibrating his feet. Had he looked back, he would have seen the small boat shudder before sinking beneath the waves in seconds, leaving no trace. It was nearly a 2-hour trip back to shore, and John smiled into the darkness, thinking about the future. A burden had been lifted from his soul, and for the first time in years, he felt hopeful. Monique had left several magazines scattered around, featuring handsome celebrities and male models with dark eyes and chiseled cheekbones. His eye could be easily modified to match the other, or so the expert said. He sighed as the sea spray shot his face. He could even put up with the constant poking and prodding from the Institute staff for a while. After all, they'd been more than helpful with his little vendetta. He supposed he owed them that much.
Welcome to Lost Relation Chronicles.
The restaurant was cozy and warm, filled with the soft hum of light jazz and dim enough to conceal secrets in every corner. Kathy sat by the window, her fingers nervously tracing the rim of her wine glass. Across from her, Roger, her new friend, or perhaps something more, wore a casual, confident grin that made her heart race. Tonight, he had brought her to this quiet, hidden spot in the city, where the risk of running into someone who might recognize her felt minimal, or so she believed. Kathy had gone the extra mile with her makeup, double-checking every detail before their meeting because she understood the impact of looking flawless. When Roger excused himself to use the restroom, she fixed a stray hair and patted her lips to ensure her lipstick was intact. But as the minutes passed, a thought crept into her mind. Roger was taking a little too long. She tried to dismiss it as nerves, yet a slight chill ran down her spine that she couldn't shake off. Her phone buzzed softly, breaking her from her thoughts. She glanced down and felt her heart skip a beat. Ben, her husband, was calling. The unexpected call took her by surprise, especially since he was supposed to be at work. Clearing her throat, Kathy lifted the phone and answered in her sweetest tone. Yes, honey? Ben's voice was calm but carried an edge she couldn't quite identify. Where are you right now? A bead of sweat formed at her temple, and she quickly laughed it off. I'm on a date. Just kidding, she replied, trying to sound playful. I'm just catching up with some friends from the conservatory, honey. There was a brief silence before he replied. Unfortunately, it's not a joke. Turn around. The words echoed in her ears, sharp and clear. She froze, her heart pounding, and slowly turned her head. There, in the dim light of the restaurant, at a table in the corner, was Ben. He gave her a slow wave, his expression unreadable. Her throat went dry as she took a shaky breath, gripping her phone tightly. Ben, why are you here? Why aren't you at work? Ben's tone remained calm. Change of plans. I thought I'd grab a quick bite, but imagine my surprise when I saw my own wife sitting here with some guy, looking a little too cozy. His voice was steady, but his words hit Kathy like a punch. Her pulse quickened as she scrambled for an excuse. Wait, what? You're misunderstanding. You think I'm on a date? What about you? You're sitting with that pretty woman over there. Ben chuckled softly. That's Maria, Kathy, my lawyer. Kathy's heart plummeted, leaving her grasping for words. She refused to let Ben or his lawyer get the best of her. Taking a steadying breath, she straightened her shoulders and, with a hint of a smile, made her way over to their table. The sound of her heels clicked softly on the floor as she approached, and she took her seat next to them, summoning all the calm she could muster. "Well, hello there," she said politely, giving Maria a small nod. "Maria, right?" Maria nodded back, looking composed, though her gaze was sharp and steady. Kathy wasted no time. She turned to Ben, her voice sweet but edged with challenge. "Honey, I have to ask, what's going on here? Why are you having dinner with a lawyer? Did something happen that you haven't told me about?" Ben looked at her, a small, unreadable smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "Well, Kathy," he said slowly, "I suppose you could say I'm in a rather unpleasant situation. It's kind of embarrassing, really." He leaned back, looking between her and Maria, shaking his head. "I never thought I'd be here, sitting with my lawyer, but here I am. You know, I just hope I'm not getting fitted for reindeer antlers this Christmas." His voice remained calm, but his eyes were hard. Kathy felt her cheeks flush, but forced herself to smile, keeping her tone light. "That sounds awful, honey," Kathy replied, turning to Maria with a small laugh. "What do you think, Maria? Imagine that your husband, who says he works the night shift, is actually secretly spying on you. A little paranoid, don't you think?" Maria's smile was smooth, her eyes giving nothing away. "Oh, trust me, life has a way of surprising us, which is why I'm here to help couples through times like these." Kathy let out a soft chuckle, though her heart raced. "So, a divorce lawyer, huh? Well, Ben, I'd hate to see you jump to conclusions. It's just dinner with an old friend, you know." She looked back at Ben, the smile never leaving her face. "A little impulsive of you, don't you think?" Ben took a long, slow sip from his glass, his eyes steady on Kathy. When he set it down, he gave her a calm, almost amused smile. "Kathy, you know I'm a calm, rational man. I don't make decisions on a whim. I prefer to think with a clear head." He leaned forward, his gaze piercing. "So why don't you go ahead and tell us about Roger? Is he a friend? Or maybe something more?" Kathy didn't miss a beat, her own smile steady. "Ben, please, I've told you already. Roger is a friend from the conservatory. He's a brilliant pianist." She shrugged, keeping her tone light. "We just happened to meet up tonight in this beautiful place to talk about music. You know how creative people like us, musicians, artists, tend to be a little more expressive. But that's all it is." Ben raised an eyebrow and let out a small chuckle. "I suppose I should hope his hands stay on the piano keys, right?" Kathy laughed, waving her hand. "Maria, you might want to note how your client here loves to provoke." "Honestly, Ben, that innuendo is pretty bold." Maria simply shrugged, watching the exchange closely, but without much reaction. Ben's expression turned more serious, though a slight smile remained. "So, Kathy," he said, his voice calm but firm, "you're telling us that you and Roger are just friends? No intimate involvement?" Kathy looked from Ben to Maria and back to Ben, a playful glint in her eye. "Ben, we're just friends, pure and simple. Unless, of course, Maria here considers a love of music a reason to file a suit for infidelity." She laughed, glancing at Maria, who chuckled and shook her head. "Oh, I wouldn't go that far, Kathy," Maria said, smiling. "I think I can handle the situation without getting too dramatic." Ben smirked, clearly amused. This whole scene struck him as almost funny. Her quick defenses, her breezy responses. "All right, honey, but you know I'd love to hear what Roger thinks of your friendly relationship." He leaned back, crossing his arms. It would be interesting to get his take on things. Kathy kept her chin up, her voice steady. "Of course, Ben," she replied. "Once Roger's back, I'm sure he'll back me up. Not sure why he's taking so long, though." She forced a little smile, though her fingers tightened around her glass. Ben leaned back in his chair, pulling out his phone and tapping the screen. "Kathy, we actually don't need Roger here. He might show up eventually, but I thought you'd prefer to hear what we have to say right now." He lifted his phone slightly, his expression unreadable. It turned out that Ben had gone into the restroom with Roger, and they had a man-to-man conversation. With a tap, a recording began to play. Kathy and Maria exchanged quick glances, both bracing themselves for what was about to unfold. First, Ben's voice came through. "Hey, man, is that cute redhead over there your friend?" Roger's laugh was easygoing, a little too comfortable. "You could say that," he replied. "But what's it to you?" Ben played along, keeping his voice light. "I've just always been amazed at how easy some guys make it look to pick up women. Maybe you could give me some tips, huh? It doesn't come as naturally to me. Roger's laugh was low and smug. Oh man, I don't know if you can teach it. Some of us just have it, you know? Ben's voice then shifted to a more playful tone, but still pressing. Hey, so tell me, people say redheads are the hottest in bed. Is that true? You get anywhere with her? Roger didn't hesitate. He laughed, sounding almost proud. Oh, they're wild, all right? That one, man. She does things. Let's just say if I'm not careful, she might break me. She bounces like crazy. There was a moment of silence in the recording before Ben responded. Wow, lucky you. Roger chuckled again, sounding pleased with himself. Lucky? I'd say so. Just hoping she doesn't wear me out tonight. You know what I mean. Ben then thanked Roger for the conversation and wished him luck. Ben emerged from the restroom first, deliberately propping the door handle so Roger couldn't get out for a while. A little lesson for Roger to linger a bit longer. The recording ended, and the restaurant's background hum filled the sudden silence at their table. Kathy's cheeks flushed, her fingers curling tightly around her glass, but she quickly forced herself to sit up straighter, clearing her throat as she struggled to keep her expression composed. Maria's gaze was sharp, her lawyerly instincts taking in every reaction, while Ben watched Kathy with an amused, expectant look. Kathy forced a smile, though her voice wavered. Well, Ben, she began, trying to maintain her calm. I think Roger was just, showing off. Men say all kinds of things when they think they're bonding with each other. He's clearly just joking around. Ben raised an eyebrow, a slight smile curling at his lips. Joking? Huh? Sounds pretty detailed for a joke. But I'm all ears, Kathy. Go ahead, explain away. Kathy straightened up, forcing a small laugh despite her flushed face. Ben, really, she said, trying to keep her voice steady. Roger is just a braggart. He loves to joke around and exaggerate. Honestly, the guy's got a wild imagination. He probably thought he was just being funny. She turned to Maria, hoping for an ally. Maria, can we really consider the wild claims of a guy who talks like an idiot as proof of anything? That's ridiculous. People say all kinds of things. Maria's expression didn't soften. She gave Kathy a tight-lipped smile, looking mildly entertained. I think I've seen enough for one night, Kathy. This isn't my usual kind of event, but I have to thank Ben for inviting me. It was eye-opening, she said with a nod toward Ben. Kathy's face grew tense, but before she could respond, she saw Roger standing and scanning the tables, looking frazzled and confused. Ben gave a polite smile. Looks like your friend is back, Kathy. I think he's looking for you. Kathy called out to him, and Roger rushed over, clearly frustrated, without even noticing Ben and Maria. Kathy, you won't believe it. Some idiot propped the restroom door shut. Had me stuck in there forever. He glanced around and then narrowed his eyes at Ben. It was you, wasn't it? Are you nuts? Ben merely raised an eyebrow, smiling, while Kathy gave Roger a pleading look. Roger, let me introduce you. This is Ben, my husband. Why don't you explain to him that you're just... But she never finished. Roger's face went pale as he finally put the pieces together, his expression turning to sheer panic. Oh, crap, he stammered, eyes wide. I think I just heard my phone ringing. Better go check on that. He gave a clumsy nod, then practically bolted to his table, snatching his things before darting out of the restaurant without looking back. Kathy stared after him, speechless, her face a mixture of shock and anger. Ben chuckled softly, shaking his head. Kathy, looks like Roger may be a decent lover, but he's a pretty unreliable friend. Seems he's not willing to stand by you in a tough spot. He glanced at Maria, then back to Kathy. Anyway, it's about time to settle up and head out, don't you think? Maria remarked as she rose from her chair, nodding in agreement while gathering her belongings. Ben gave Kathy one last glance and added with a half-smile, Oh, and honey, you'll be covering dinner with Roger out of your own pocket? Kathy's jaw tightened, but she forced herself to nod. She called over the waiter, pulling out her card and trying to maintain as much composure as possible. However, when the waiter swiped it, he frowned and shook his head. Sorry, ma'am, it's not working. Just then, Ben and Maria walked by on their way out. Kathy turned to Ben, her voice tense. Ben, my card isn't working. Did you do this? Are you really going to leave me here like this? Ben shrugged, glancing back with a feigned sympathetic smile. I didn't think it would be an issue, Kathy. I figured your friend would handle it. Damn it, Ben. Kathy hissed, her voice barely controlled. You're actually going to leave me here without any money? Ben's smile widened slightly. Come on, Kathy. You're a resourceful woman. I'm sure you'll figure something out. With that, he turned and walked out, Maria at his side. As they exited, Maria shot a glance at Kathy. Ben, I'll have the papers finalized by tomorrow morning, Maria said. Ben nodded, relieved. Thank you, he replied, letting out a breath as he prepared to go home while Kathy remained behind in the restaurant, left to face the bill and the fallout from the evening. When Ben arrived home, the weight of the day settled heavily on him. He moved through the house slowly, taking his time to toss a few essentials into a suitcase. Today had proven more challenging than he'd anticipated, and although he felt the urge to pack up everything tonight, he decided it could wait until tomorrow. A few days at his brother's place sounded like just what he needed. Barely an hour later, the front door swung open, and Kathy stormed in, her eyes flashing with frustration. She set her purse down with a thud and made her way toward him. Ben, what was that all about? She fumed. You had to make a cheap show out of everything, dragging your lawyer along and setting me up like that. Do you have any idea how humiliating it was? She threw her hands up, her words spilling out. And to leave me there without any way to pay? They were about to make me wash dishes or clean toilets. That's what they told me. Thank God my friend Angie came to help me out. Ben let out a tense, stressed laugh. More a reaction to his nerves than anything funny. It was a habit of his to laugh in stressful moments, but this time it seemed to hit Kathy the wrong way. What's so funny? She demanded. Ben raised a hand, trying to keep his voice even. Kathy, he began slowly. What instrument do you play? Kathy blinked, thrown off by the odd question. What? What does that have to do with anything? You know I play the flute, Ben. He looked at her, his smile twisting with a bitter edge. Then maybe you should go find your lover and play his skin flute. He gave a mocking bow, his voice dripping with sarcasm. Might suit you better. And please, leave me alone. Kathy's face reddened, her fists clenching at her sides. Ben, damn you. Are you serious? You bring that woman, your lawyer, to humiliate me, and now this? Do you want a divorce? You're just going to throw it all away because of some silly thing Roger said? You're so petty. Ben felt a sharp pang in his chest. Kathy, he said softly, I did love you once, and maybe you loved me too. We were a great couple. But he shook his head. Now it's clear this means nothing to you. So yeah, I want a divorce because my wife apparently wants to ride piano players. The words struck hard, and Kathy's face contorted with anger. Without another word, she grabbed her purse and hurled it across the room, aiming right for him. Go to hell, Ben. Stop insulting me. I don't deserve this, she yelled, her voice cracking. Ben's face tightened as his patience finally snapped. He picked up his sports bag, slung it over his shoulder, and looked back at her one last time. With a curt, polite bow, he turned and left the house without saying another word. The next morning, Kathy opened the door to find Maria standing there, a thick stack of papers in hand. Kathy's expression hardened as Maria held out the documents in silence. Without a word, Kathy snatched them up, her jaw clenched. Maria's calm, unbothered demeanor only fueled Kathy's determination. She didn't like to lose, ever. She considered herself smart and clever enough to navigate whatever Ben threw her way. As soon as Maria left, Kathy got to work. By that afternoon, she had already hired a well-regarded lawyer and started preparing her case. Her strategy was clear. Portray Ben as a jealous, overreacting husband. After all, she thought, he had only caught her having dinner with Roger, a friend and fellow musician. Maybe Ben had let his jealousy get out of hand. But as she mulled it over, a chill crept down her spine. How had Ben known about her meeting with Roger? She had been so careful, hadn't she? Kathy racked her brain, trying to remember if she had let anything slip, but came up empty. Pushing the thought aside, she felt confident that she could make this whole mess disappear in court. Finally, the day of the trial arrived. Kathy sat at the defendant's table, cool and collected. She and her lawyer had crafted a strong argument. Ben would be painted as a paranoid husband who had taken things too far. However, as the proceedings unfolded, her confidence began to falter. Ben's lawyer stepped forward with something Kathy hadn't anticipated: hard evidence. There were printed screenshots from Kathy's own phone, messages between her and Roger that went far beyond friendly chat. Her face flushed, and she hissed under her breath, "Damn it, Ben. You went through my phone. That's a complete violation of privacy." But it didn't stop there. Ben had one more ace up his sleeve: a witness. He called their neighbor, a retired man who lived across the street, to testify that he had seen Roger coming to the house one evening while Ben was working the night shift. Kathy's lawyer attempted to discredit the witness, but the damage was done. Ben's case was rock solid, and Kathy's defense unraveled. By the end of the trial, the verdict was clear. Ben had won. Afterward, Kathy managed to catch up to him in the courthouse hallway. She stepped in front of him, her voice softer than it had been in weeks. "Ben, please, can we talk? Maybe we don't have to end things like this. I made mistakes, but we had something special. Isn't there any way we could try again?" But Ben's expression remained cold, untouched by her plea. "Please, Kathy, you didn't just make mistakes. You lied. Even now, standing here, you're trying to twist things," he said, shaking his head. "I loved you, but betrayal is something I can't forgive." Kathy's face fell as she watched him turn and walk away, leaving her to confront the full weight of her choices. The game she had tried to play had come back to haunt her, and now there was nothing left to do but live with the consequences. 3 months after the trial, the finality of Kathy's situation set in. The divorce had been quick and unyielding, a stark reminder of how drastically her life had changed. Ben had been resolute, and Kathy found herself navigating a world that felt increasingly hostile. At first, she tried to maintain her composure, believing that she could still piece her life back together. But the reality of her dwindling savings and mounting bills soon crushed that hope. She lost her job at the music school, the director citing unprofessional behavior following the scandal. Without a steady income, she struggled to keep up with her mortgage payments. The house that had once felt like a sanctuary transformed into a prison of debt, each missed payment echoing in her mind. As the eviction notice arrived, Kathy stood in the living room, surrounded by boxes filled with her past. The walls felt like they were closing in, reminders of a life that no longer belonged to her. Friends who had once supported her began to distance themselves, some whispering behind closed doors about her fall from grace, while others simply didn't know how to react. With nowhere to go, Kathy sought refuge with a distant relative who reluctantly took her in. Living in cramped quarters only deepened her sense of isolation and shame. As she lay awake at night, the weight of her choices pressed down harder. The regret was suffocating, and she often thought back to the life she had with Ben, what it had felt like to be loved and secure. In her darkest moments, Kathy realized that she had lost more than just her job and her home. She had lost the man she had once vowed to cherish. The betrayal she had thought she could brush aside had not only cost her a marriage, but had also stripped away her identity. Now, she was left to confront a future that seemed bleak and uncertain, with the echoes of her past haunting her every step. Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments section below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.
Welcome to Lost Relation Chronicles.
When you find out your spouse is being unfaithful, it's like a whirlwind of emotions crashes over you. You might feel inadequate, like you weren't enough. Shame, confusion, and even a surge of anger that makes you want to scream or lash out. Honestly, I never wanted to know what that felt like firsthand. But life has a way of throwing curveballs you never see coming. My wife always joked that my impulsive buying habits would be my downfall. Turns out, she was right, but not in the way either of us ever expected. It all started innocently enough with a TV ad for a voice-activated recorder. The commercial promised long battery life, excellent audio quality, and complete satisfaction. I was sold instantly and ordered one on the spot. The charge hit my credit card within a day, but the device didn't arrive for a week. When it finally did, I tore open the box like a kid on Christmas morning. The recorder was smaller than I had expected, but I was too excited to care. I popped in the batteries and spent the next hour doing my best impressions, recording everything I could think of until the tape ran out. I couldn't wait to listen back, but as I played it, I was struck by how ridiculous I sounded. I laughed at myself at first, but then the thought hit me. Was this how everyone else had been laughing at me, too? I rewound the tape and placed it in my sock and underwear drawer where my wife would be sure not to find it. I heard her car pull into our driveway, so I threw the packaging into the garbage and was on my way to the curb with the bag in hand as she got out of her car. As I ran to help her take the groceries out of the car, she was grumbling out loud about how expensive groceries were getting these days. I just smiled and took the bags inside the house and went back out for the rest. She walked back inside with me this time, and I realized that as usual there was no kiss of greeting or any acknowledgement of me on her part. As we were packing the groceries away, I tried to tell her about my day, but from the expression on her face it was obvious she just did not give a damn. I realized at that point that my marriage really might be in trouble. I lapsed into silence, and she immediately started up about the a-hole she was working with and how underpaid she was as well. I said nothing but just kept packing. The amazing thing was that this attitude of hers had only started after St. Nancy had joined the company over a year ago. Nancy was a bright young lawyer who joined the firm of Nuts and Bolts and had immediately started trying to make a name for herself. She did it that all right, as one of the most ruthless and tenacious lawyers that you could tangle with. She was rude, obnoxious, and overbearing, and also my wife's newest best friend from day one. She was a 304 and was not afraid to let you know it. After listening to my wife whine and moan for a while, I gently reminded her that she could quit and work somewhere else or stay home if she so desired. After all, I did own the biggest contracting firm in the state, Dream Homes Inc., and we would not need the money. She was putting some canned goods into the cupboard as I spoke, but stiffened and turned slowly around. Look, Terry, I do not intend to stay at home and be a housewife while you are out gallivanting from job to job. I do not plan on staring at the walls in this house, you arrogant, overbearing a-hole. She spat at me. My eyes widened in shock as I realized what my wife had just said. I fought to keep my voice down and barely succeeded as I choked my words out. I am going to take a shower and cool off before we both say some things we regret. I turned and walked away slowly with my hands clenched into fists as the blood rushed to my head. She screeched at my retreating back. You coward! How dare you walk away from me when I am talking to you? Get back here now if you value your sex life. Now I hole if you know what is good for you. I stopped and slowly turned around and gave up on not raising my voice because she had just jumped all over my last nerve. Listen, Kathy, to every word that I am going to say. Her eyes widened in shock and disbelief when she heard me swear for the first time since she knew me. She took one step back as I started in on her. I proposed to you because I fell in love with you, and because I believed that you were the woman who I wanted to have and to hold for the rest of my life. Our marriage was great for the first 5 years, but recently you have changed into someone who I do not even wish to know. She started indignantly, but I raised my hand before she could get a word out. I am not finished yet. For the last year, you have tried your best to imitate a dead woman whenever I try to make love to you. You make it seem like a chore instead of an act of love between two married people. If you think that no sex is really a threat, then you need to realize that I knew my hand intimately before I met you, and if necessary, I will reacquaint myself. I paused and took a deep breath to control my anger before I spoke again. I am tired of being constantly put down by you, and I no longer feel welcome in my own home. You need to make up your mind about whether you are interested in making this marriage work or not, and take the necessary steps to do so. Now I am going to take a shower, and you need to make a decision now or later. It is totally up to you. When I came back down the stairs about half an hour later, my wife was sitting staring through the kitchen window. She refused to acknowledge my presence. When I got back downstairs, she walked past me and up the stairs without saying a word. I sat down in the living room and tried my best to enjoy some NBA basketball, but after a while, the TV was watching me as I stared off into space. I snapped myself out of it as I heard my wife coming down the stairs. When I looked up and saw her, I noticed immediately that she was carrying her overnight bag. She stopped in front of me and in a cold and detached voice told me, I am going over to Nancy's apartment and spend the night there, unless you wish to object. I said nothing as she turned and stormed out of the house. I walked out to the patio and tried to figure out just how I had ended up at this stage. I met Kathy about 7 years ago when I walked through the doors of her law firm to set up a trust. I had won the lottery and I wanted the money set up so that no one could touch it. I wanted to use the money to expand my contracting business, and I had some other details I wanted worked out. I had been working at a construction company about 5 years ago when my buddy Jason, who was a carpenter like me, had fallen from the roof he was working on. The company I was working for refused to even acknowledge him in any way. They refused to take liability for the accident even though they did not have any proper safety equipment in place, and if you asked about it, you were gone. Even with my testimony and his, against everyone on the site, we did not stand a chance. He recovered eventually, but the bills and being laid up really put him out a lot. Because we had both lost our jobs, we decided to start up a small contracting company together to earn money. It was tough at first, but things were now starting to even out when I won the lottery for the largest jackpot ever in the history of our state. I discussed my plans with Jason, and we both agreed that investing in our business was a good plan, but we decided that we should ensure that the money was protected from any future relationships, so he had recommended Nuts and Bolts to me for setting up a trust. I was on my way out after signing the papers when I bumped into Kathy, and for me it was lust at first sight. She was short, about 5 feet 4 inches tall, and every single inch was curved. She was just beautiful, and I just had to try my luck with her. She gave me a hard time at first, but after a little coaxing and a lot of flowers, she finally decided to go out with me. She was bright and very articulate, and she was a joy to talk to. There were few things that we could not discuss without her being well informed about them, except for sports and my bedroom decor. The latter she took quite a while to get to know, and it was only after I proposed marriage to her about 6 months after dating her that she became as well versed in it as me. She told me a lot about her childhood and how hard it had been growing up on the wrong side of town. She had realized from early that the only way to pull herself out of there was with an education, and she had buckled down with her schoolwork and was soon top of her class. She was very shy at school, and after her body had started to develop, she had soon captured the interest of the boys. But after a disastrous first date in which the guy had tried his best, including force to get in her pants, she had given up dating in high school. She had found after graduating that she did not have enough money to go on to college, even with a scholarship. So she had started working at the law firm as a clerk/typist and completed a paralegal course at the community college. She was immediately promoted and had been doing the job for the last 5 years until she bumped into me. She always refused to discuss her previous partners with me, but just smiled and said, "You will never lose me to any man." Her reluctance bothered me a bit at first, but I decided not to dwell on it for too long. After all, it's all in the past, right? We often discussed my development plans for the business, and she was in agreement with everything I wanted to do, even suggesting that I set up a company-owned nursery for my employees' kids. Well, I took her advice on all that, and after discussing it with Jason, we started to slowly implement our long-term goals for our company. The first thing we did was to set up full medical insurance on all employees and their families and hired a safety engineer to cut down on any accidents on our work sites. We also set up a pension plan with contributions being voluntary and provided free independent financial advice to all employees. We also set up a credit union for staff and family members only, which allowed them low-interest borrowing. Well, needless to say, our employees were very happy, and we had very few people quit except those who were going on to further their studies. When we had started the business, our company's quote was, "You give us your money, and we will give you your dream home." Our competition had laughed at us, but after the customers started to realize that what we said was what they got, they were scrambling to keep up with us. The implementation of all these things took time, and a lot of mine at that, but I always tried to be there for my wife. It took about 5 years before everything started paying off, but eventually it all came together. Strangely enough, when the business was going well, is when my home life started to deteriorate. It started for me when Nancy started spending all her free time over at our house. She and I never hit it off at all. I mean, she just rubbed me the wrong way from day one. Any argument or debate, she had to win it, and her opinion was the only one that counted. You could give her facts and statistics, but nothing could change her mind when she believed in something. She was always crying down men, and soon I never even bothered to speak to her anymore, which pissed her off even more. I just did not care. The last straw came for me one day when I was sitting on my patio trying to relax and take a nap. She and Kathy both came out and sat down beside me. I tried to ignore the both of them, but Nancy soon started up a conversation about how all men were all dogs who needed to be castrated. I waited for my wife to leap to my defense at least, but when I opened my eyes, I was surprised to see her nodding her head in agreement. I almost blew a fuse right then, but just when I was starting to get control of myself, Nancy started up again. This time she was going on and on about how me could not properly satisfy women and staring me right in the eyes as she did. Now this combined with the fact that my loving wife was there nodding her head like a Chinese mandarin while Nancy spoke set me off. I rose slowly to my feet, and holding my hand out, I pointed to the road. "Listen here, you little man-hating piece of crap. I put up with you because you are my wife's friend, but I will be damned if I am going to sit here and listen to you try to emasculate me in my own home." Her mouth drooped open as she stared at me, and she went inside to pick up her belongings and left in a huff, slamming the door as she came back through it. My wife started after her, but was too late to stop her from driving off. She ran back to me and started to read me the riot act about me being so rude to her friend. I raised an eyebrow and asked her, "Where were you when she was here mouthing off to me, trying her damn best to make me uncomfortable in my own home?" She spluttered and turned on her heels and walked away. I got the silent treatment for about a week after this incident, but seeing how little effect it had on me, she started to imitate a dead woman anytime I tried to make love to her and refused any attempts at foreplay. It put me off at first, but after some research on the internet and a little experimentation with her, I became quite proficient at giving her a nice climax, which pissed her off even more. All of this happened about 6 months ago, until the argument me and Kathy had just had, which had escalated things to the point they're at now. I sighed and got up and went upstairs to our bedroom. I went immediately to pick out my new toy and try to figure out how to improve my impressions and get my mind off my problems. When I hit the play button, I nearly dropped the voice recorder in surprise as I heard my wife's voice coming through the speakers. I was debating whether or not I had a right to listen in on the conversation when I heard my wife say, "I miss you too, sweetheart." I pressed stop immediately and sat sewn on my bed immediately as my hands started to tremble. What the hell was going on here? I knew the best place to find answers were on the tape, so I gritted my teeth and pressed play. Kathy, listen, sweetheart, I can't wait to see you tonight. I am going to munch on you until you beg me to stop. Wait a minute. I need to put you on speakerphone while I pack my bag. Don't worry about that a-hole overhearing us. The door is locked and this room is virtually soundproof once that door is closed, so he cannot hear a word we say. Hold on. Nancy, don't forget to bring our favorite toy Long John with you. I just love the way it stuffs me. Don't you love the powerful climax it gives you, honey? Wait a minute. Are you still screwing that loser, girl? Kathy, after today, no, I won't be anymore. He had the audacity to cuss me out and tell me his hand was better after I threatened to stop giving him sex. Nancy was now laughing hard. Oh hell, he did not say that. But good riddance, right? Isn't he a lousy lay anyway? Kathy, actually no. He is pretty okay after all in bed. Even though I tried the corpse routine on him, he was still able to get me to come and hard too. Nancy, well, I guess he is not so useless after all. Why did you marry him anyway though? What I mean to say is you know that you are definitely a full-fledged lesbian. So why the charade? Kathy, because he was pretty much my meal ticket. Once I found out he won the lottery, I was hooked. Besides, the relationship I was in was pretty much dead end anyway. She was just offering great sex anyway and nothing else. I decided to marry him, save some money, go to law school and get a degree, then dump his butt. Besides, no matter how many times he makes me happy, he is still a man and I prefer women. I stopped the tape after that last tidbit because I was starting to see red. So that was why she never told me about any of her previous lovers. I tried to get up and start packing some suitcases, but when I tried to stand, my legs gave out on me and I fell back on the bed. I lay there and cried and cursed the lie that was my life, or should I say the liar who was my wife. Eventually, I managed to pull myself together and got up and started packing my suitcases with all my clean clothes. I packed up everything that I held of value and placed it in my pickup truck. There was no way I was going to stay in a house where I would be reminded of her and what she did to me. I called my company's lawyers and asked for the most ruthless divorce lawyers they knew of. After they gave me the name and address of the firm, I drove immediately over there to get the ball rolling. I gave them the tape and explained that I wanted a no-fault divorce. Unless she fought it, then the tape should be used and her adultery brought into the light. I left the office after signing the necessary papers and went down to my truck and drove to the nearest hotel. None of my family lived close, and I was glad of that as I had no wish for anyone to find out that I had been horned by a woman. Had it been a guy, I don't think it would have screwed me up as much emotionally. I placed my suitcases in my suite and then went back down to my van. I drove over to Jason's house and asked him to keep my stuff in his garage until I had arranged for a new residence. I gave him a brief explanation about my pending divorce, and he thankfully did not try to probe me for more information. I canceled my cell phone service and got a new one set up the next day. I explained at the office that my soon-to-be ex-wife was no longer allowed inside my office, and other than a few questioning glances, no one said a word. The divorce papers were served at her workplace, and she went into shock after receiving them. She tried calling me but got an out-of-service message on my cell phone and was told that I was not accepting her calls when she tried my office. She found out where I was staying, but after being slapped with a restraining order, she gave up on that. She and Nancy did try to fight me on the divorce and demanded a hefty settlement. My lawyers called me and I showed up at their office to meet with Kathy and Nancy, who was representing her. I watched her face as the tape was played for the both of them, and they both turned pale and slumped into their chairs simultaneously. After that, there was no fighting on their parts, and they were both eager to sign the agreement. Afterwards, when we were on our way out, Kathy did stop me and tried to apologize. I held my hand up to let her know to shut up. I put a ring on your finger over 6 years ago, promising to forsake all others for you. I tried my best to be a great husband and to be your friend and your life partner, but you were never interested, were you? You betrayed everything I held sacred and dear, and that can never be replaced. Goodbye and good riddance. Wait, please. I will do anything for you to take me back. Even arrange a threesome between you, Nancy, and I if you want. She pleaded with me. The look of disgust I threw at her before I turned to walk away broke her down, and she just sat down and cried. As I walked away, I wondered why all of a sudden she was so interested in getting back with me, but quickly pushed it from my mind. Who gave a damn anyway? Too little too late as far as I was concerned. Before I turned the corner, I heard her shout to me. Believe it or not, I did fall in love with you, and I am truly sorry for the hurt I caused you. I continued walking because it was too little too late as far as I was concerned. I designed and had my company build me my dream home after that, and settled down to live my life as a bachelor. I did hear that Kathy and Nancy broke up in less than a month, but who cares? My life is in front of me, and I will not be looking back to the past anymore.
Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comment section below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.
Welcome to Lost Relation Chronicles.
Right now, It feels like my life has been torn apart, and I'm barely holding it together. I just need to get this off my chest, even if it's to strangers on the internet. For almost 30 years, I thought I had the kind of life that most people dream of. I married my wife, Linda, when we were young. She was 20, and I was 22. We were broken, but we were happy. We built our life together from the ground up, raising 2 daughters, Betty and Maria, who meant everything to me. Betty, my oldest at 26, has always been the overachiever, valedictorian in high school, graduated at the top of her college class, and now she's getting married this fall to her longtime boyfriend. Maria, my youngest at 24, is the carefree one. She's sweet, always smiling, and has been incredibly close to me since she was little. I always thought I had a great relationship with both of them. Linda and I had a solid marriage. At least, that's what I thought. Sure, we had our ups and downs, financial struggles when the kids were young, arguments now and then, health scares, but through it all, we stuck together. I truly believed we were a team, and I imagined us growing old together, sitting on the porch, reminiscing about our younger days. I loved her with everything I had. Then last week, everything fell apart. It started like any other weekday. Linda told me she was going out for dinner with Betty and Maria. They do this regularly, every couple of weeks, girls' dinner, as they call it. It's their time to catch up, laugh, and talk about things they don't want to share with me. I never minded. In fact, I loved that they were close. It made me proud as a husband and father, like I'd done something right in raising a family that loved each other so much. That night, Linda was upstairs getting ready, and I was in the kitchen, sipping coffee and scrolling through the news on my phone. I can remember it so clearly, the sound of her phone buzzing on the counter. It wasn't unusual. She gets messages from the girls all the time, especially when they're making plans. Without thinking, I picked it up. I'm not proud of what I did next. I didn't have any reason to be suspicious, but something made me open the message. It was from an unsaved number. The message read, "Can't wait to see you tonight." I froze. My first reaction was confusion. This couldn't be right. It had to be a mistake. Or maybe it wasn't what it looked like. I stared at the message for what felt like forever, my mind racing. Finally, I tapped on the thread to see the rest of the conversation. What I found shattered me. The messages weren't long, but they didn't need to be. They told me everything I needed to know. The texts were from her boss, and they were making plans to meet for dinner. But it was clear this wasn't just a business dinner. The tone of the messages was flirty, affectionate. There were texts from earlier that week, like, "I miss you." "Once a week isn't enough." Linda replied, "I miss you too." My stomach turned. My heart started racing. My hands were shaking so much that I almost dropped the phone. This was my wife, the woman I'd built my life with, the mother of my children. She was having an affair. I didn't know what to do. Part of me wanted to march upstairs and confront her right then and there, but I couldn't. I was in shock, still trying to process what I'd just seen. I needed more information. I needed to be absolutely sure. A few minutes later, Linda came downstairs, dressed up and looking as beautiful as ever. She smiled at me, kissed me on the cheek, and said, "Don't wait up, okay?" Her voice was so casual, so warm, as if everything was completely normal. I don't know how I kept my composure, but I managed to say, "Have fun with the girls." As soon as she walked out the door, I grabbed her phone and turned on location sharing. I'd never done anything like that before. I'd never felt the need to spy on her, or anyone else for that matter. But in that moment, I didn't care. I needed to know the truth. I sat there for a while, staring at my phone, waiting for her location to update. When it finally did, my heart sank even further. She wasn't heading to the restaurant where she and the girls usually met. Instead, she was going somewhere else, a place we'd been to many times as a family. I quickly texted Betty and Maria. "What time are you meeting Mom for dinner?" Both of them responded almost immediately. Betty said, 7 o'clock. "Can't wait to see her," and Maria said something similar. They were lying. My own daughters were lying to me. I couldn't believe it. I didn't want to believe it, but at that moment, I knew Linda wasn't the only one betraying me. My daughters were part of it too. I waited a little longer, watching Linda's location. She finally arrived at the restaurant. My heart pounding, I grabbed my car keys and drove there. When I got to the restaurant, I parked outside and looked through the window. It didn't take long to spot her. She was sitting at a table near the back with her boss. They were holding hands, laughing, completely unaware that I was watching them. It felt like a knife in my chest. I pulled out my phone and took a picture of them. I don't even know why I did it, maybe to prove to myself that it was real, that I wasn't imagining things. Then I drove away, sitting in my car, staring at the picture of my wife with another man. A wave of emotions hit me. Anger, sadness, disbelief. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know how to face her, how to confront her. So I didn't. Not yet. Instead, I opened our family group chat and sent the picture. Just the picture with a simple caption. Glad you're enjoying girls' dinner? Then I turned off my phone and drove to my brother's house. I wasn't ready to deal with the fallout. I couldn't face it yet. That night, I lay awake in my brother's guest room, staring at the ceiling, trying to understand how my life had fallen apart so quickly. I had always thought of myself as a good husband, a good father, but now I wasn't so sure. Everything I thought I knew about my life, my marriage, my family, felt like a lie. I didn't go home that night. I couldn't. After I sent the photo to the family group chat and turned off my phone, I drove aimlessly for a while before finally pulling into my brother's driveway. It was late, but he let me in without asking too many questions. He could tell something was wrong. I guess it was written all over my face. I didn't tell him everything. I just said I needed a place to crash for the night. He offered me a beer, but I wasn't in the mood. I just wanted to be alone. I spent the night on his couch, staring at the ceiling, unable to sleep. My mind was racing, replaying everything that had happened in the past few hours. I couldn't stop thinking about seeing them together in the restaurant. The way Linda smiled at her boss, the way they leaned in close, holding hands like teenagers in love. It made me sick. How long had this been going on? How had I been so blind? And then there was Betty and Maria. The way they lied to me so casually, like it was nothing. I raised them to be honest, to have integrity, yet here they were, helping their mother cover up an affair. It felt like a betrayal on an entirely different level. The next morning, I finally turned my phone back on. It immediately lit up with notifications, texts, missed calls, voicemails. Linda had called me dozens of times, and Betty and Maria had texted me as well. I didn't have the strength to go through everything at once, so I skimmed through the messages. Linda's messages were exactly what I expected. Please call me. I can explain. It's not what you think. We need to talk. I couldn't bring myself to listen to her voicemails. I knew hearing her voice would only make me angrier. Maria's messages were different. She sent me text after text, apologizing profusely. Dad, I'm so sorry. I never should have lied to you. I hate myself for what I did. Please don't hate me. Can we please talk? I'm so scared I've ruined everything. She even had her boyfriend, Josh, text me. Hey, this is Josh. Maria's really upset and having a panic attack. She's scared you'll never forgive her. Please call her. I didn't reply to any of them. I didn't know what to say. Betty, on the other hand, was a different story. Her text was short and cold. Dad, I'm sorry you found out this way, but I think you're overreacting. Don't throw away a good marriage over one mistake. Overreacting? One mistake? My blood boiled. This wasn't just a mistake. This was a full-blown betrayal, not only by Linda, but by Betty and Maria too. They had lied to me. They had helped their mother cover up something that completely shattered our family. I couldn't help but replay all the times they must have lied to my face. Every time I asked about their plans, they'd tell me they were going to dinner, knowing full well what Linda was really doing. They'd smile at me, acting like everything was normal, all while hiding the truth. I spent most of the day stewing in my anger and heartbreak. My brother tried to talk to me, but I wasn't ready to open up yet. I needed time to process everything. By the afternoon, I realized I couldn't let this go without saying something. I started by texting Maria. Maria, I love you, but what you've done has hurt me deeply. I need space to figure things out. She replied almost instantly. I'm so sorry, Dad. I'll never forgive myself for this. I love you so much. I didn't respond. Then, I texted Betty. Betty, this isn't a mistake. This is a betrayal from my entire family. Please don't contact me until I'm ready to talk. She didn't reply, but I knew she must have shown Linda because, shortly after, Linda started texting me again. Don't take this out on the girls. They were just trying to protect me. They didn't mean to hurt you. I ignored her. I wasn't interested in excuses. Later that evening, I finally told my brother the full story. I showed him the messages, the photo, everything. He was furious on my behalf. You need to cut them all off, he said. They clearly don't respect you. Why should you keep them in your life? His words hit me hard because deep down, I knew he was right. But cutting off my daughters? That was a step I wasn't sure I could take. That night, I started thinking about what came next. I knew my marriage to Linda was over. There was no coming back from this, and honestly, I didn't even want to try. But what about Betty and Maria? Could I ever trust them again? Could I ever look at them the same way, knowing what they did? I decided I needed time, Time to think, time to process, time to figure out how to move forward. But one thing was certain. My life, as I knew it, was over. The fallout didn't hit like an explosion. It lingered, a slow, suffocating burn. By the time I got back to my brother's place that evening, I wasn't angry anymore. I was numb. All the emotions I had felt earlier, the rage, the disbelief, the heartbreak, had given way to a dull, crushing weight in my chest. It felt like the life I had built, the one I thought was solid, was crumbling, and all I could do was watch. The first thing I noticed when I turned on my phone was the silence. Earlier, it had been full of frantic notifications, missed calls, and texts. But now, there was nothing. No more desperate messages from Maria. No follow-ups from Betty. No voice messages from Linda. It was like they had finally realized I wasn't going to respond and had given up, or maybe they were regrouping. Who knows? Either way, the silence was unsettling. The quiet gave me time to think, and that wasn't a good thing. When the anger faded, all that was left was the hurt, the questions that kept swirling in my mind like a tornado. How long had this been going on? How many times had Linda lied to my face? Did Betty and Maria ever feel guilty about what they were doing? Or was this just normal for them? Betraying their father to protect their mother? That night, after hours of silence and stewing in my thoughts, I finally sat down with my brother in his living room. I knew I couldn't carry this weight alone anymore, so I decided to tell him everything, to finally let it all out. I needed someone to hear me, to listen without judgment, even if there was nothing anyone could do to fix it. I sat across from him, my hands trembling slightly as I began. The weight of the betrayal felt heavy on my chest, but I pushed through. I found something on Linda's phone. I started, my voice steady but thick with emotion. Text messages, lies. I couldn't ignore it, and it led me to something else. My brother didn't interrupt, just gave me a nod, silently urging me to keep going. I told him everything, the text between Linda and her boss, the lies Betty and Maria had told me, the way they'd all covered up what Linda was doing. I even told him about the picture I'd taken of Linda and her boss at the restaurant, how I just stood there watching them, the feeling in my gut sinking deeper with every passing second. I couldn't take it anymore, I said, swallowing hard. I sent the picture to the family group chat. I didn't even care anymore. I just needed them to know, to see what was really going on. My brother leaned back in his chair, rubbing his face, a deep frown forming on his face. I could see the anger in his eyes as he processed what I just said. He didn't speak right away, just let the silence hang between us. That's messed up, he finally said, his voice tight with frustration. I don't even know where to start. I mean, I always thought Linda was, a little too polished, too perfect, but I didn't think she'd do something like this. And the girls, man, he shook his head, his voice quiet with disbelief. I don't know. It's low. His words, though filled with anger, gave me a small sense of relief. I needed to hear that I wasn't going crazy, that I wasn't losing my mind. It wasn't just me seeing things through a fog of rage and confusion. Someone else saw it too. But even though he was angry on my behalf, it didn't make the situation any easier. It didn't take away the pain, the betrayal. My brother's anger was helpful for a moment, but it was mine that had been festering for hours. I don't know what to do, man, I admitted, my voice breaking slightly. I can't even look at them the same way anymore. I don't even want to go back to that house. I feel like everything's falling apart. My marriage is over, and now, I can't even trust my daughters. They lied to me. They helped her cover it all up. My brother stared at me for a long moment, and I could see the wheels turning in his head, trying to figure out what to say, how to help. He wasn't sure either. You need to cut them all off, he said finally, his voice low but firm. They clearly don't respect you. Why should you keep them in your life? His words hit hard, and I felt a stab of guilt. Could I really cut them out like that? Could I just walk away from my family? It felt impossible. But deep down, I knew he was right. They had all betrayed me in different ways. The trust one once had in them was shattered beyond repair. I don't know, I muttered, feeling defeated. Cutting them off. I'm not sure I can do that. Not with Betty and Maria. They're still my daughters. My brother nodded, understanding, but the frustration was still clear in his face. I get it, he said, but you can't let them walk all over you. Not like this. You need to take a step back and think about what's best for you. What about you, man? What are you going to do? I didn't have an answer. Not yet, anyway. I had so many questions swirling in my head, so many emotions crashing against each other. I didn't even know where to start. I need time, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. I need time to think, to figure this all out. I can't just go back to normal like nothing happened. This isn't just a mistake. It's betrayal. And I don't know how to handle that. My brother didn't offer me any easy solutions. He didn't tell me what to do. He just sat with me, letting the silence settle, understanding that there was nothing to fix right away. It wasn't about finding an immediate answer. It was about giving myself the space to process what had happened, to figure out where to go from here. The next morning, I decided it was time to stop wallowing in my anger and start taking action. The first thing I needed to do was get my finances in order. I couldn't afford to focus on the emotional mess if I didn't protect myself first. So, I spent the majority of the day canceling joint accounts, transferring money into a separate account Linda couldn't touch, and securing anything that could be at risk in the divorce. I wasn't going to let her use my grief as an opportunity to catch me off guard. But it wasn't just about Linda. As I reviewed my accounts, I couldn't stop thinking about the tens of thousands of dollars I had spent, money I had saved up for Betty's wedding. All that money, gone. For a daughter who had lied to my face and helped her mother betray me. The thought made me sick to my stomach. I made a note to discuss this with my lawyer. Maybe I couldn't get that money back, but I sure as hell wasn't going to spend another cent on them. By the afternoon, I felt ready to move on to the next step. I called a lawyer. Actually, I called several. My brother had advised me to meet with a few before making a choice. So, I spent the rest of the day in law offices, retelling my story to strangers who tried their hardest to stay professional, but I could see the judgment in their eyes. By the end of the day, I had made my decision. I picked someone who was tough, smart, and most importantly, aggressive. I told her I wanted the divorce to be quick and clean, but I also wanted to make sure Linda didn't get anything she didn't deserve. She reassured me, claiming she had handled plenty of cases like this. While it didn't completely ease my mind, at least I felt like I was in capable hands. That night, as I sat alone in my brother's guest room, I started thinking about what I would say to Linda. I hadn't confronted her yet, mostly because I didn't trust myself to stay calm, and because I didn't want to give her the satisfaction of an explanation. What could she possibly say that would make any of this okay? But I knew I couldn't avoid her forever. Eventually, I'd have to face her, and when that moment came, I wanted to be prepared. I couldn't let myself get drawn into her excuses or her tears. I needed to stay focused and remind myself of why I was doing this. So, I wrote everything down, the questions I wanted to ask, the points I needed to make, all the emotions I hadn't yet processed. I wasn't sure if I'd actually say everything I'd written, but putting it on paper gave me a sense of control, like I wasn't just a passive victim in all of this. The hardest part, though, was thinking about Betty and Maria. I hadn't spoken to them since sending those texts, and I wasn't sure I could. How do you talk to your daughters after learning they've been lying to you for months? How do you even begin to rebuild trust after something like that? I wanted to believe Maria's apologies were sincere, that she was truly sorry for her role in all of this, but how could I trust her? How could I believe anything she said after everything I'd uncovered? And Betty, her cold, dismissive response cut me to the core. I'd always known she was closer to Linda, but I never imagined she'd take her side in something this serious. It felt like she had made her choice, and it wasn't me. That night, I made another decision. I wasn't going to reach out to them. If they wanted to fix things, they'd have to come to me. I wasn't going to chase after them, begging for their forgiveness or explanations. They made their choices, and now they had to live with the consequences. As I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, I felt a strange sense of calm for the first time since everything had exploded. I didn't feel completely lost anymore. I had a plan. It wasn't perfect, and it wouldn't fix everything, but it was a start. I was done being the victim. From now on, I was going to take control. After 2 days of hiding out in my brother's guest room, dodging calls and sorting through my emotions, I knew it was time to face Linda. Avoiding her wouldn't change anything, and I had things I needed to say. Things she needed to hear. I sent her a text late that night. "We need to talk tomorrow at 10 a.m. at the house." She replied almost immediately, "I'll be there. Please just let me explain." I couldn't believe her audacity. Explain what? I thought. There was nothing left to explain. I wasn't interested in her excuses or half-hearted justifications, but I didn't reply. I'd save that for when we were face to face. The next morning, I woke up early, barely able to sleep. I drove to the house, the place that used to be our home. As soon as I stepped inside, I was hit with a wave of nostalgia mixed with bitterness. This was where we'd built our life, where we'd raised our kids, celebrated holidays, and made memories. Now it felt like a hollow shell, tainted by everything that had come to light. Linda showed up right on time. She walked in nervously, her eyes red and puffy like she hadn't slept in days. She was holding her phone like a shield, and I noticed immediately that she wasn't wearing her wedding ring. That detail hit me harder than I expected. "Thanks for agreeing to meet," she said softly, standing just inside the door as if she were afraid to come closer. "Don't thank me," I replied, my voice colder than I intended. "I'm not here to make things easier for you." That seemed to set the tone for the conversation. We sat down at the dining room table, the same table where we'd shared so many family meals. Linda started talking, her voice trembling, going through the motions, saying all the things I expected to hear. It wasn't serious. It didn't mean anything. It was a mistake. She kept repeating herself, cycling through the same tired excuses, as if saying them over and over would somehow make them true. "Stop," I said, my patience running thin. "I don't want to hear excuses. I want answers." She looked at me, confused, as if she didn't understand what I was asking. "How long?" I demanded. She hesitated, clearly trying to figure out what would be the best answer. "A few months," she said, her voice faltering. "Try again." I spat, fury rising in my chest. Her face crumpled as she realized she couldn't lie her way out of this. "Almost a year," she whispered, barely audible. "A year." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. I clenched my fist under the table, trying desperately to keep my anger in check. An entire year of lies. My voice shook with rage. A year of you pretending everything was fine, all while you were screwing around behind my back. She flinched, but I couldn't bring myself to feel any sympathy. How could I? How many times had she smiled at me, kissed me, told me she loved me, all while sneaking around behind my back? I couldn't wrap my head around it. How long have they known? I demanded, my voice tight. Linda winced, her eyes darting away. "Not the whole time," she mumbled. "A couple of months ago?" I pressed, unable to keep my disgust out of my voice. "I didn't want to drag them into this." "But you did," I interrupted sharply. "You made them part of your lies. Do you have any idea what that's done to me?" She didn't respond. Instead, she started crying, full-on sobbing, as if that would somehow make it all better. "I didn't mean for any of this to happen," she sobbed. "I never wanted to hurt you, but I was so unhappy." "Unhappy?" My voice echoed in the empty house, growing louder with each word. "You were unhappy, so you decided to blow up our family? You were unhappy, so you cheated on me and dragged our daughters into your mess? Do you have any idea what you've done, Linda?" She just sat there, crying into her hands, unable to respond. And for the first time, I didn't feel sorry for her. "You've ruined everything," I said, quieter now, the weight of it all sinking in. "Not just our marriage, but my relationship with Betty and Maria. How am I supposed to trust them after this? How am I supposed to look at them and not see this betrayal?" "I didn't want them to lie to you," she whispered through her tears. "I didn't want any of this." "Then why did you do it?" I shot back, frustration building again. "Why didn't you come to me? If you were so unhappy, why didn't you try to fix things instead of sneaking around behind my back?" She didn't answer. Maybe she didn't have one, or maybe she thought whatever she said wouldn't change what had already been done. After a long silence, I stood up, the decision finally clear. "I'm filing for divorce," I said, my voice calm but firm. "You'll hear from my lawyer soon." "Please don't do this," she begged, standing up, her voice pleading. "We can work through this. We can fix it." "There's nothing to fix," I snapped, my voice cold. "You made your choice, and now I'm making mine." Before I walked out, I turned to face her one last time. "By the way, don't expect me to pay for Betty's wedding anymore. She can ask her boss to foot the bill since you two are so good at keeping secrets." Her face crumpled again, but I didn't stick around to see her reaction. As I walked through the house and out the door, I paused in the hallway, staring at the family photos on the wall. There we were, me, Linda, Betty, and Maria, smiling like the perfect family. I used to love those photos, but now they felt like a cruel joke. I grabbed the nearest one, a picture from Betty's high school graduation, and smashed it against the wall. The glass shattered, and for a brief moment, I felt a flicker of satisfaction. But it didn't last. As I walked to my car, something hit me. This was just the beginning. The confrontation with Linda was over, but the real battle was still ahead. I still had to face Betty and Maria. I still had to figure out how to move forward. And I still had to confront the painful reality that the life I thought I had, the life I'd spent nearly 30 years building, was gone. The confrontation with Linda had cleared the air, but it hadn't made things easier. If anything, it made the betrayal feel more real, more weighty. The anger I felt toward Linda was sharp, but it was focused. I knew what she had done and why. And now, I was walking away. The situation with Betty and Maria was far more complicated. They were my daughters, my flesh and blood, but they had chosen her. The day after I told Linda I was filing for divorce, I decided to meet with Betty and Maria separately. I couldn't just ignore them, and I wasn't ready to completely cut them off without at least hearing them out. But I knew this wasn't going to be some casual chat. The trust between us was shattered, and I needed to know if there was anything left to salvage. I started with Maria. She'd always been the more emotional one, and her texts over the past few days had been frantic, bordering on desperate. I asked her to meet me at a park near my brother's house. When she arrived, it was obvious she hadn't slept in days. Her eyes were puffy, and she kept nervously fidgeting with her hands. As soon as we sat down on a bench, she burst into tears. "Dad, I'm so sorry," she said, her voice trembling. "I didn't know how to tell you. I didn't want to hurt you." I gritted my teeth, trying to keep my anger in check, but it was hard. "Then why did you lie to me?" I demanded, my voice sharp. "Why did you cover for your mother? Did you think I wouldn't find out?" She wiped her eyes, looking guilty and lost. "It wasn't like that," she said quickly. "She told me about it a couple of months ago." I was mad at her, but she begged me not to say anything. She said she'd end it soon, that it was just a phase. I didn't know what to do. My fists clenched. "You didn't know what to do? You knew it was wrong, but you chose to protect her. You betrayed me, Maria. You stood by her and lied to my face." She shook her head, her sobs coming faster now. "I didn't want to hurt you, Dad. I swear." I leaned forward, my voice low but seething. "You already did. You both did. And now, I have to deal with the wreckage. All the lies, the deceit, and the fact that my own daughters turned their back on me." I stared at Maria, struggling to process her words. "So, you decided to protect her instead of telling me the truth?" I demanded. She looked down, her voice barely above a whisper. I thought she was going to stop. I didn't want to blow up the family if there was a chance she'd fix things. I didn't know it would get this far. "That's not good enough, Maria." I shot back, my voice cold. "You don't get to excuse what you did by saying you didn't know. You knew she was cheating. You knew she was lying to me, and you went along with it. Do you have any idea how that makes me feel?" She broke down again, her face buried in her hands. I felt a pang of guilt watching her cry, but I pushed it down. This wasn't about sympathy. It was about the damage they'd all done to my trust. "I'm not saying this to punish you," I said, my voice steady but sharp. "But I need you to understand how deeply this has hurt me. Right now, I don't know if I can trust you. I don't know if I'll ever be able to trust you the way I used to." Maria nodded, her shoulders shaking. "I'll do anything to fix this, Dad. Anything. Just tell me what to do." I didn't have an answer for her. I told her I needed time to think, then I left, feeling the weight of everything pressing down on me. Meeting with Betty was a completely different experience. I asked her to meet me at a coffee shop, thinking it would be better to talk in a neutral space. She showed up 10 minutes late, looking polished and composed, as if nothing had happened. That alone rubbed me the wrong way. "Thanks for meeting me," she said, sitting down casually. I didn't waste any time. "Betty, why didn't you tell me about your mother's affair?" I demanded, my voice tense. She sighed, leaning back in her chair as if she was too calm. "Dad, I didn't want to get involved. It's between you and Mom. I thought it was better to stay out of it." "Stay out of it?" I snapped, leaning forward. I repeated myself, my voice rising with frustration. "You didn't stay out of it, Betty. You lied to me. You covered for her. That's not staying out of it. That's choosing a side." "I wasn't choosing sides," she shot back defensively. "I was trying to keep the peace. I didn't want to make things worse." "Worse for who?" I demanded, my anger boiling over. "For me? Or for your mother?" She didn't answer, and that told me everything I needed to know. "Betty, you're an adult," I said, my voice steady but laced with anger. "You're getting married soon. If your fiancé did to you what your mother did to me, would you want everyone around you to lie and protect him? Or would you want someone to stand up and tell you the truth?" "That's different," she said, clearly annoyed. "Mom made a mistake. It doesn't mean you have to throw everything away." Her words hit me like a slap in the face. "A mistake? Is that what you think this is?" She did not make a mistake. She betrayed me day in and day out. "It is a mistake," she said firmly, her tone growing more defensive. "People make mistakes, Dad. You don't have to burn everything to the ground because of one bad choice." "One bad choice?" I repeated, shaking my head in disbelief. "Do you even hear yourself? This wasn't a bad choice. It was a betrayal. By your mother, by you, by Maria. And you're sitting here acting like I'm the one overreacting. I'm not saying that, she quickly responded, her voice softening. I just think you're being too harsh. You're hurt, I get that, but you'll regret cutting us out later. We're your family. Family doesn't lie to each other, I said, my voice tight with anger. Family doesn't cover for someone who's tearing everything apart. You and Maria didn't just lie to me. You broke my trust. And right now, I don't see how I can move past that. She crossed her arms, looking frustrated. So, what? You're just going to disown us? Pretend we don't exist? I am not going to pretend. I will cut you out of my life. We sat in silence for a few minutes. The weight of it all hung in the air. Finally, I stood up. I've said what I needed to say, I told her. I really hope you never find yourself in the same situation like me. She didn't try to stop me as I walked out. That night, I sat alone in my brother's guest room, replaying both conversations in my mind. Maria seemed genuinely remorseful, but I wasn't sure if I could ever fully forgive her. Betty, on the other hand, was a different story. Her refusal to acknowledge the seriousness of what she'd done made it clear that she didn't think she was in the wrong. For the first time, I seriously considered cutting them both out of my life. It wasn't a decision I wanted to make, but the thought of trying to rebuild a relationship with people who had betrayed me so deeply felt impossible. That night, I made my decision. The next morning, I called my lawyer. I told her to revise my will. Betty and Maria were to be removed as beneficiaries. Everything, my savings, my retirement fund, the house, would go to my sister and her kids. They had always been there for me, and I knew they wouldn't betray me like my own daughters had. When I told my brother, he didn't try to talk me out of it. You're doing the right thing, he said. They made their choices. Now they can live with the consequences. The fallout was immediate. The next day, Maria called me, her voice a mess of hysterical sobs. Dad, please don't do this, she begged. I know I messed up, but I love you. I don't care about the money. I just don't want to lose you. Her words hit me harder than I expected, but I didn't let it sway me. Maria, I'll always love you, I said, my voice firm. But love doesn't mean I can forget what you did. I need time. Maybe someday we can rebuild our relationship, but right now, I can't have you in my life. She kept crying, but I held my ground until she finally hung up. Betty, predictably, took a different approach. She sent me a long email, accusing me of being petty and vindictive. You're punishing me for trying to keep the peace, she wrote. I'm just trying to avoid conflict, and now you're ruining my wedding over something that has nothing to do with me. I didn't bother responding. There was no point. Then Linda tried to intervene. She sent me an email, the tone polished, carefully constructed, like she thought I'd fall for it. She begged me not to cut the girls out of my will, claiming it wasn't fair to punish them for mistakes she made. She even had the audacity to suggest that removing them would irreparably damage the family. You're really going to play that card? I muttered to myself, rolling my eyes as I read her email. I didn't bother responding to Linda either. She could try all she wanted, but I knew the truth now. The days passed, and slowly, I started to feel lighter. The anger was still there, but the suffocating weight of the betrayal wasn't as overwhelming anymore. Cutting ties hadn't been easy, but it was necessary. I needed to protect myself, emotionally, not just financially. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe again. It's been a month now since I cut Betty and Maria out of my will. I haven't heard from them directly, and I'm fine with that. I've heard from mutual friends that Betty is scrambling to find the money to cover the wedding expenses I'd been paying for. I don't feel a damn bit sorry for her. She made her choice when she sided with her mother, and now she's dealing with the consequences. Betty's marriage crumbled just as swiftly as mine had, though in a cruel twist, it mirrored my own experience. It wasn't long after the wedding that her husband, Greg, started showing signs of trouble. At first, Betty dismissed it. Work stress, long hours, all the usual excuses. But when Greg's behavior became impossible to ignore, Betty finally confronted him. The truth spilled out, and it was even uglier than she imagined. Greg had been cheating on her for months. Betty, devastated and betrayed, found out the hard way, through a text message he'd carelessly left on his phone. The realization hit her like a ton of bricks. She was no stranger to betrayal, but the depth of it, coming from her own husband, shook her to the core. She demanded answers, but Greg was evasive and defensive, barely offering a word of regret. He claimed it was a mistake, a momentary lapse, but Betty knew it wasn't just that. It was a pattern, a betrayal that went beyond just sex. It was the betrayal of trust, of her heart. Divorce was inevitable. Betty couldn't bring herself to stay with a man who destroyed what little was left of their bond. As the proceedings began, Greg did everything he could to make things as ugly as possible. He fought for half of everything, though Betty had nothing left to give. She felt the weight of the irony. A woman who had spent years protecting a man who lied to her, only to end up with nothing but pain and broken dreams. As for me, the divorce had been a long, drawn-out nightmare. After everything I'd been through, I knew I couldn't repeat the same mistakes. I had to make sure I was financially free from Linda, free from everything she had taken from me. I signed over everything I had to my sister and her kids. The house, my savings, my retirement. I couldn't bear to leave Linda or my daughters a single dime of what I had worked for all these years. They didn't deserve it. Linda certainly didn't. But the real sting came when Betty asked for help. She came to me, her eyes swollen from crying, asking if I could help her with the divorce. I had nothing to give. Nothing. I'd given it all away. There was no house, no money, no safety net left. The silence between us in that moment was deafening. I wanted to reach out, to help her, but I couldn't. I couldn't afford to. And the bitterness in my chest grew as I realized, in the end, that everything, every penny, every bit of what I had worked for, was gone. My marriage to Linda had left me with nothing but the shattered pieces of a life that once felt whole. Now, I was living with the consequences of my decisions, and I couldn't help Betty in the same way I once had. I could only watch as she went through the same pain I had, trapped in a web of lies and betrayal. Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments section below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.